Subcommittee will come to order. Good morning, everyone. Today we'll be discussing the wide variety of activities carried out by Immigration and Customs Enforcement, or ICE, and we'll first focus on the agency's Student and Exchange Visitor Program. We will hear testimony about this program from Ms. Catherine Cotton, the Director of the International Office at Duke University, and we will then have time for a round of questions. And then we will hear testimony about the overall range of ICE's programs from Assistant Secretary Julie Myers. We'll then have time to ask Ms. Myers questions about the agency's 2009 budget and her goals for ICE over the next year. In our post-9/11 world, ICE has an extremely important mission. It has broad responsibility for enforcing customs and immigration laws, including the prosecution and removal of those found in violation of immigration statutes. While other areas of the department are focused on preventing unlawful entry into the United States, ICE has what is perhaps the even more difficult job of finding and removing illegal aliens once they've blended into the population. Given the important role ICE plays, we will want to hear why the agency's 2009 budget request is only $4.7 billion, or 1/4% more than provided for 2008, far below the rate of inflation. I want to start out, however, by highlighting an area in which ICE has clearly made good progress. 2 years ago, ICE's financial audits showed material weaknesses in all 8 areas reviewed. I want to congratulate Ms. Myers and her financial management staff for eliminating all of those material weaknesses in the 2007 audit. And I trust that they will continue to work hard to correct the reported financial system security deficiencies. ICE continues to face numerous challenges in other areas, and this subcommittee has high expectations for what can be achieved before the transition to the next administration. Chief among our interests is ICE's ability to identify and remove every criminal held in penal custody and judged deportable. As you may know, as our listeners may know, we made this goal the centerpiece of the fiscal 2008 appropriations law, and we continue to believe that it should be ICE's top priority. In 2006, the DHS Inspector General reported there were over 600,000 criminal aliens held in U.S. custody, but largely unknown to ICE. Yet today, ICE is not able to guarantee that all incarcerated criminals without the right to remain in the U.S. will be removed from the country upon their release or parole. For 2008, this subcommittee provided ICE $200 million for the comprehensive identification and removal of criminal aliens, and ICE is required to report to the committee by March 25th, less than 1 month from now, on how this funding is being used. We'll want to hear from Ms. Myers about the progress that has been made in planning for this initiative. In 2008, the subcommittee also provided significant support for ICE to expand its detention capacity, more than quadrupling last year's request for additional beds and increasing ICE's detention capacity by 4,500 spaces to 32,000 beds overall. This continues the example set in the previous Congress. Since 2006, in fact, the subcommittee has increased ICE detention capacity by a dramatic 56%. We need to ensure that this expansion is accompanied by equally robust oversight of detention standards. In particular, the subcommittee is concerned about the treatment of children and other vulnerable individuals in ICE custody. The largest increase proposed for the 2009 ICE budget is for 1,000 additional detention beds. Last year, the committee discovered that ICE had been forced to request a budget for detention beds that did not meet its operational detention needs. So we'll be asking Ms. Myers for assurance that the budget requested for detention in 2009 reflects the best operational estimate that the agency has for needs in the coming fiscal year. An important security responsibility at ICE is the protection of federal offices by the Federal Protective Service, or FPS. GAO reported that the capabilities of FPS have deteriorated so significantly that federal buildings, quote, face a greater risk of crime or terrorist attack. This must be corrected. The committee mandated additional FPS hiring in the 2008 omnibus bill, which we will certainly discuss today. The Student and Exchange Visitor Program is another important component of ICE's domestic activities. This program's mission is to ensure that foreign students and the educational institutions they attend are legitimate and do not offer opportunities for terrorist or other exploitation. ICE has proposed doubling the revenues collected from foreign students and educational institutions to increase associated enforcement, to improve institutional support and outreach, and to develop a replacement data system critical to the program. Coincident with protecting our country, however, we must be careful not to send a signal to the students, researchers, and academics throughout the rest of the world that the United States no longer welcomes them. The 9/11 Commission report recommended, quote, rebuilding the scholarship, exchange, and library programs that reach out to young people and offer them knowledge and hope, end quote, as a part of a strategy to counter cultural causes of terrorism. On a subcommittee overseas delegation to the Middle East in January, foreign ministers in Egypt and Oman emphasized how a reduction in student exchanges with the United States negatively affects their countries. Perhaps more critically for us, however, it also harms the global image and perception of our country abroad. After DHS and the State Department revised the student visa process in 2003, foreign enrollment fell by more than 20,000 students nationwide for the 2005-06 academic year. Fortunately, foreign enrollment is once again increasing and has almost reached the historic highs set in the 02-03 academic year. But higher fees and negative perceptions about a planned expansion of ICE enforcement risk sending the wrong message to those who wish to come to this country for educational purposes. To discuss this issue and open our hearing this morning, we welcome before us Ms. Catherine Cotton, the Director of the International Office for Duke University and the Duke Medical Center. Ms. Cotton is a constituent of mine, I'm proud to say, but she was recommended to the subcommittee by the national group, the Association of American Universities. Ms. Cotton's an expert on international student visa issues and has worked with DHS since it first established the programs to monitor international students and exchange visitors. So we look forward to exploring the implication of ICE's new proposal with you, Ms. Cotton. We appreciate your traveling here to be with us today. So we'll hear from you in just a moment. Let me first turn to my colleague, Ranking Member Hal Rogers, for his remarks, after which we'll have 5 minutes for your testimony, Ms. Cotton, and then time for questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and welcome to Ms. Cotton and Assistant Secretary Myers. First, a few words about ICE. In many ways, the recent history of ICE epitomizes the maturation and development of DHS itself. It was just a few years ago that ICE was suffering from what I would call an INS hangover, as the agency was failing to meet its mission requirements, unable to hire critical personnel, and was found to be deficient in virtually all aspects of its financial and budgetary systems. But now, just 3 years later, ICE is meaningfully contributing to significant improvements in our border security, sustaining the practice of catch and return, vigorously enforcing immigration and customs laws, keeping pace toward hiring additional special agents and immigration enforcement officers, and just recently cleared its material weaknesses and obtained a clean financial audit. Assistant Secretary Myers, this turnaround is a testament to your leadership, as well as to the perseverance and dedication of the men and women at ICE. In many ways, you all have weathered the onslaught of challenges and helped ICE begin to meet our expectations as the second largest law enforcement agency in the federal government and the largest investigative component within DHS. But before I congratulate you too much, I must offer a bit of caution. I don't have to tell anyone here that the very nature of this mission requires constant vigilance and continuous improvement. Allowing the wrong person with the wrong motives into our country can have dire consequences. Our recent past reminds us of this. ICE must build upon its contributions to the Secure Border Initiative and never again return to the flawed and defeatist practice of catch and release. ICE must expand efforts to disrupt and arrest the heinous perpetrators of transnational crimes such as internet pornography exploitation, human smuggling, and money laundering. ICE must ensure sufficient resources are devoted to customs enforcement to protect our economy, and I'm pleased to see the fiscal 09 request does just that. And finally, as our terrorist adversaries search for less obstructive means of entry into the country, ICE must rise to the challenge of preventing abuse of programs like the Student and Exchange Visitor Program and Visa Waiver Program. So, to put it mildly, ICE must continue to improve. Far too much is at stake to fail. After all, it was James Madison who noted America's, quote, indebtedness to immigration for her settlement and prosperity, quote, and it was Lincoln who noted that not even the Civil War could stop immigrants from seeking the gold and silver that waits for them in the West. So I see ICE as a fulcrum in the balance between legitimate travel and trade, on which our country depends, with that of the security that has become an unquestioned necessity in the post-9/11 world, a role that is as challenging as they come. Assistant Secretary Myers, you know the stakes, you know the challenges. Today I'm interested in hearing how ICE is meeting this challenge and how this budget request moves ICE forward. As for our discussion today on student visas, I look forward to hearing how ICE can improve its service to academia while also providing the security that's necessary. After all, we must never forget that all of the 9/11 hijackers exploited legal means of immigration, including tourist and student visas. I certainly appreciate the fact that our academic institutions heavily rely upon the contributions of international students and scholars. Several of us on this subcommittee have learned firsthand about the diplomatic value of international students in exchanges with leaders from the Middle East. But after 9/11, our student visa programs required reinvention, for lack of a better term, because these programs lacked controls aimed at protecting us from terrorism, let alone sufficient mechanisms to ensure visa holders were, in fact, bona fide students. So I believe I state the obvious when I say there must be a balance between the needs of our institutions of higher learning and that of security. The challenge, of course, is for ICE to execute its Student and Exchange Visitor Program in a way that effectively maintains the records of legitimate visiting students and scholars, but does not create undue burdens upon them or host schools. Therefore, I'm encouraged by ICE's recent improvements to improve its service to academia, as well as to the security surrounding all aspects of student visas. In closing, I want to be very clear about this. I certainly see the value in the over 673,000 active students attending over 9,200 higher ed institutions throughout the U.S. These are our world's medical researchers, future civil engineers, teachers, scientists, diplomats. But I'm not necessarily concerned about the hundreds of thousands of legitimate non-immigrant students who seek to enrich their educational experience. I am, however, very concerned about the one individual, the wrong individual, with the wrong motive, seeking to do us harm. In closing, I welcome our witnesses here today. Look forward to hearing how ICE can improve its management of the Student and Exchange Visitor Program, as well as improve its larger contributions to our homeland security. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much. Ms. Cotton, please proceed.
Chairman Price and Ranking Member Rogers, I really appreciate the opportunity to be here and to testify on behalf of Duke University. I cannot speak for all of the higher education institutions in the U.S., but I can tell you that we are sharing similar experiences with our international students and scholars. I'm especially pleased to hear that you were visiting earlier this year with leaders in the Middle East. I was there with a Duke group a few years ago in Egypt and Jordan, and there was, even then, when 9/11 was fresher. There was the interest in coming to the U.S. and the assumption that the U.S. had a democratic system that allowed its citizens to speak to its leaders. And I remember sitting outside the Cairo Museum speaking with a young man who said, "You tell your president," and he gave me a list of things for me to go back and tell my president, because he believed that that was possible in America, that I could come back and talk to my president. And so we do appreciate from the education community that our members of Congress are going out and making those contacts and seeing those relationships. At Duke, in the SEVIS program, we have about 1,900 international students. Those are F1 students primarily. Probably a couple of hundred of those are on optional practical training, which means that they've graduated, but they are still our responsibility under SEVIS for as long as they're in optional practical training. So even after they graduate, we are requiring them to report addresses and so on, and we're keeping those contacts valid. We have about 600 J1s who are generally the professors, the researchers, the people in short-term scholars, specialists, and so on. Those would be in the J1 program under SEVIS, and we can talk more about them later if you'd like. I'd like to speak about the recommendations for fee increases and to say that we understand that it takes money to do what ICE has proposed, and certainly an improved computer system, improved access to data is something that we all need. An increase of 100% for the SEVIS fee from $100 to $200 is not trivial. And people think of universities like Duke, how much could $100 be? But there are students all over the country for whom that is a great deal of money. That's as much as it costs to make the trip all the way to the embassy. And this fee is generally not refundable. So they pay the fee, and then they go to the embassy, and then because of the non-immigrant intent that is part of the F1 and J1 student status, they are denied visas and not permitted to come. And so they have not only spent that money, but they've spent it in their minds for nothing, and they come away with an even worse feeling about America. So we would certainly encourage careful thought about doubling that fee. We're also concerned about the monies that the schools will be paying. We know that we haven't been paying that for a number of years for the recertification, and that we will be doing that now. Certainly, no university in America can say, please charge us more. We have to be careful with all of our money. And we would like to see appropriate benefits from that additional money. Also, we would like to see a use of funds that is efficient and effective. Most of our schools, most of the colleges and universities, are already verified, certified, accredited, whatever, through various national systems, such as the financial aid system through the Department of Education. And so there is really no need to go back and reinvent the wheel on that part of our educational credentials at most of the universities. That could be done easily through data comparisons, through getting that information from other sources where it's already available. In terms of working with us to do the recertifications, we would certainly appreciate any help that we could get, but the recertifications for the most part are happening as we move along. And so the need to spend a lot of energy on a specific recertification is probably not as high as one might think, because we are reporting in our institutions not only about the students, but about changes to our institutions through the SEVIS system, through the I-17s, and through the J program similarly. So as things change at our institution, we are making those reports. So we would encourage the use of information already available and not doing double work that doesn't need to be done in this process. The local area liaison officers that are being suggested, we think would be wonderful if they can give us the kind of assistance that we need to deal with other bureaucracies. And we're having difficulties in connections of data with Social Security, for example. And we'd like to be sure that in general we get value for the dollar, that we are getting reports that normally could come out of SEVIS, but now we're preparing separately for IIE, that we have access to information, that students in particular have access to their own information, that they be able to go into SEVIS and see that they are in status and what their history is, and that schools be able to do that as well. In conclusion, Duke has been a part of the development of the electronic record-keeping system since the days of Cyprus or Cyprus. We were one of the 21 schools in that development, and we had great hopes for it at that time. Certainly the events of 9/11 changed the direction in which we had to go, and we had to put aside some of the enhancements that we would have expected to have had there not been a 9/11 event. And we would encourage that ICE move forward with those enhancements as they were planned at that time. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and we will put your entire statement in the record, which of course elaborates on the points you made and goes beyond them. Let me ask you first a rather broad question, and then zero in somewhat on the fee increases and the benefits that might accrue from an increased flow of fee revenue. But in general, and you gave us a statement very close to the ground in terms of specific policy changes or proposed changes. But if you could just back up a little bit and help us understand what's at stake here. We, of course, have done some necessary things since 9/11 to increase security and increase enforcement activity, and to make sure that international students are who they say they are, and that the institutions are legitimate. But there has come with that certain negative perceptions and some rather bureaucratic practices, which we've all heard about in our offices, particularly those of us who represent higher education constituencies. How are we doing now in striking the balance that needs to be struck? What more can we do, or should we do, to ensure that U.S. programs remain the top choices for foreign students while ensuring security?
Thank you. And some of these recommendations will go beyond the areas of ICE and SEVIS. I think certainly at this moment, one of the things that keeps people out of the country is the non-immigrant intent issue, that students and scholars have to prove that they intend to return home when they have finished their education or their research or their teaching. This is part of the law at this point. But we could look at regulations or at instructions to consular posts that would look at the non-immigrant intent issue differently. Since non-immigrant intent is the most common reason for visa denials, it is certainly the most common reason for denials for the international students and scholars. So that is an area of concern. And then certainly when people move, when they get to the United States, they're afraid to travel. They're afraid that if they go out, they won't be able to get a visa to come back, or if they leave, it may take not just the few days of a scientific meeting, but maybe many weeks or months to get visas to come back. And we would encourage that, since we are collecting data in ICE, in SEVIS, that we have this information available, that we do visa extensions in the U.S. Once a person gets here, there should be a way to manage that before they leave, particularly since we are reporting data on all of these F and J students and scholars, and it's available from other sources as well. That information could be combined and used in an efficient way to give visa stamps to people, or visa extensions, or whatever we'd like to call it, before they leave the U.S., so that that's not one of the things that they need to worry about, plan for, or spend time on before they return. So those are areas that would be important. And those would send messages that say that the U.S. wants you here. And then as people arrive, and these are small things, but things that we talked about when we were planning the Cyprus SEVIS earlier, is perhaps at ports of entry, special lines that would say, welcome students and scholars, come over here and scan your documents through this line at the major ports, so that there is a welcoming rather than a suspicion implied. Whether or not that's the intent, that is the way that people sometimes see their experience coming in. In addition to that, just the fact that we're raising the fees sends a message. People hear about money and they hear about fee raises, and I mentioned in my comments that we're going to get a call from the BBC, and we will. We will get those calls at Duke. We will get them all over the country. When these fees go up and this information goes out, the message that gets out is a very short one. We're talking about media here. So the message that goes out is the U.S. has just doubled the fees for an international student or scholar to come to America. And the next thing we get is a call saying, why have you doubled the fees? And they don't want to hear the discussion we're having here today on why that happens. What they hear is that the U.S. is now making it harder for those international students and scholars to get here. And then after they arrive, in general, they must pay that SEVIS fee again if they move to, if they go out and come into a different program, they graduate, they return. So some way to make that fee perhaps a lifetime fee or a 10-year fee would help offset the negative feelings.
Well, that does segue into what I'd like to ask, and I'm sure other members will elaborate on this. So maybe you can answer briefly and elaborate later. But you've, I think, taken a reasonable stand here today on the fee question. You've made it clear that that it's a serious matter to increase the fee on students or on institutions, and you've just now stressed the kind of negative signal that it sends. You've also said, as I understand you, that if the fees are to be increased, we need to make sure that there's a commensurate improvement in the services rendered. Now, ICE says that they want to use the expanded, the increased fees to expand enforcement efforts, to hire new support personnel to serve as liaisons to academic programs, and to create a new database to replace the one currently used to track foreign students and exchange visitors. So, what about those proposed uses of these revenues? One, given your experience with the student visitor program to date, will it be beneficial for ICE to hire field liaisons to work with academic programs? Two, what kind of relationship do you maintain with the compliance officers who enforce exchange visitor and student visa regulations? What impacts do you see for expanding this function? Do you believe it's possible for ICE to do so without disrupting academic programs? And three, what about the database? From your experiences with the initial deployment of the database, what improvements would you suggest so that the new system works properly upon its initial deployment?
I would like to know more about the mission of the liaison officers. As I mentioned earlier, once a student is certified, a school is certified and then moves on to recertification, a lot of that work is done. And so for colleges and universities, this would to some degree be an exercise. If the liaison officers can help us solve problems where student requests are lost, where we have data that conflicts at Social Security, at claims, at SEVIS, those kinds of things, liaison officers who could be available and problem-solving would be a tremendous benefit. If the purpose of the liaison officer is primarily to help us do certification and recertification, certainly new schools getting initial certification need a lot of help, and we think that would be appropriate. I don't know what the statistics are, and perhaps we can hear later from ICE on how many applications they're getting to do initial certifications. I think with recertification, certainly for colleges and universities, there's a question of how much that would be needed. In terms of the database, we would like to see the database improved and to see articulation among the databases improved, because we have students who, for example, cannot get Social Security cards because the data has not done its migration from one database to another. They cannot be identified. They maybe don't get paychecks for a month or more. This happens with students and with scholars. So in those areas of liaison and database and the ability to see better data, certainly we would like to see better information in the systems that serves the purpose of improving international student-scholar experiences. that would be very useful to us. And individuals in our areas, liaison officers, who could improve that experience as well would be truly a benefit. We're just not sure what that means right now.
Thank you. Mr. Rogers?
Thank you. We appreciate your testimony. In the upgrade of SEVIS, so-called SEVIS 2, is a recognition that there is a mutual interest in security that ICE, I think, is hoping to leverage in its upgrade to the SEVIS 2 system. In that no university or college wants to be, that's sponsoring foreign students and scholars, wants to be seen as an enabler of terrorism or criminal behavior. Because certainly an abuse of the student visa program would almost certainly result in stricter controls and higher costs and all of that. So we all have a mutual interest in seeing that the program runs well. And the SEVIS 2 system demands that participating students and scholars comply with specified data requirements, and that schools meet the standards for hosting international students. And the school recertification proposal within SEVIS 2 will probably provide the strongest means by which ICE can maintain the integrity of all schools. And by the way, the latest count I've heard is there's 9,248 approved schools. So the need for recertification, I think, is evident. They highly according to ICE, they've investigated some schools that, after acquiring certification, knowingly accepted foreign students who failed to attend classes. And in some cases, host institutions have assisted ICE in maintaining the integrity of non-immigrant students. The highly publicized story in '06 of the 11 Egyptian students who had received student visas to study in the U.S. but never showed up on campus or attended classes. In that case, Montana State University reported their absence through SEVIS. ICE agents were able to follow up on investigations. So do you agree that there is a mutual interest, both from the school's point of view and from security point of view, that the student visa program needs to be clean as a hound's tooth, so to speak?
I absolutely agree that the schools ought to operate with the interest of the security of the United States in mind. There's no question of that. And to the extent that schools are not doing that, then I think we need to deal with those schools. But when one talks about whether a student has appeared or is attending classes, currently in SEVIS, we are required to report that a student has arrived and reported to class, and we do this every semester, and we do it each semester for students who are continuing, such that those students who either are not reported as present or are reported as not showing up, that information goes back to ICE, so they will have that information from our schools each and every semester. That's a different discussion, though, than whether they are attending classes and what that may mean. Certainly at a place like Duke, in general, we don't take attendance at classes, and that this is true for foreign students, for domestic students. At colleges and universities, the expectation is that you will attend classes as an adult, and that you will appear for exams and so on. And so we are not taking roll call as you might do in third grade. The expectation would be that the students would make reasonable progress towards their degrees, and certainly if they are failing their courses, if they flunk out of school, then they are reported to SEVIS as having done that. At the graduate level, if they're really not appearing and not functioning, normally their graduate advisors would be in touch, and there would be involuntary withdrawals or recommendations that they move on to less rigorous programs, again, we would make those reports in SEVIS. So certainly it is a partnership between the schools and ICE and DHS to keep this program, as you said, as clean as a houndstooth, and I think it should be. But we do need to talk about what that means and what the expectations are and what the realities are.
Could you briefly and concisely, even tersely, tell us what you think about SEVIS 2, what you know about it, good, bad, indifferent?
I was privileged to be part of a stakeholders meeting last July in the development of SEVIS 2, and we have great hopes for it in the educational community, and there were a number of people from the educational community at this meeting. So assuming that it can do what we have heard that it can do, we think that there can be great benefit for everyone in a new, more vigorous, more robust, more flexible SEVIS 2 system. What we'd like to see as part of that system is more movement towards reporting by the schools and less with adjudications, particularly, for example, in the optional practical training area, where there is now adjudication. We would prefer to see notification from the schools. So I think there is great hope, but I think we need to be careful of where it goes.
Thank you.
Mr. Rodriguez.
Thank you very much, and thank you for being here. Let me make a couple of comments. I want to ask you some questions. I know you've asked for some monies for cyber-related securities, which let me just reinforce how, at least from my perspective, how important I feel about that, because I know you have money laundering that's occurring, a couple of other things in terms of fraud. And I wanted to just reinforce that, and I want to be able to, at a later date, come back. But I wanted to ask you regarding the student. But one of the things that I wanted to ask you, you know, and I might, maybe the second witness might be the most appropriate one. I had heard the number of Saudis, that there were some 22,000 Saudis that had come in as students. Are you familiar with that, or do you have any information on that in terms of how that came about, or?
Thank you for that question. In terms of numbers of students and scholars, from the academic perspective, I think the Institute for International Education would have those numbers. In terms of immigration issues, I cannot speak to that, and I would leave that to Assistant Secretary Myers.
Who does the assessment of those students as they come in? Is it the FBI, or who checks them out as
Well, what we understand from our students and scholars, certainly from the academic community's perspective, we would send a document to the student, and then that student or scholar would go to the embassy, and through the application process there, fingerprints, biometrics, and so on, there would be a security clearance at that end. And again, Assistant Secretary Myers can speak to the details of that.
Okay. So she would be more appropriate for responding to those questions.
And then at the port of entry, there would be another review.
Who determines the percentage of of nations in terms of who's allotted so many students or that kind of thing? Is there a formula?
Very good question. Different schools have different goals. There is no national limit, or at least at the student scholar, F1 student scholar level. Certainly for immigrant visas, that's true, but not for the student and scholar visas. And so you will find different institutions generally have different working relationships. So they may have built a very good working relationship with a school in Saudi, for example, and they bring in a lot of Saudi students. Or they have a joint program, as Duke does. We have a medical school that is a Duke medical school in Singapore. So we tend to have a lot of exchange with Singapore and also with China. So it isn't...
So that's generated by the institutions, not by any formula that we might have that you might be aware of?
It's generated, yes. The people who come, the numbers and the home countries, and whether they're students or professors or researchers, are generally the result of what the institution believes is important for that institution.
Do you know of any problems that we might have had, you know, as it relates to students, you know, in terms of difficulties as it deals to, you know, securing and making sure that we have appropriate, you know, who would have that data? Are you, if anybody, for example, found that, you know, it's questionable that we would have to deport or you know, or the number of students that have applied and that we've denied?
Applying at the embassies and denials, that I think would be Department of State information on who's come in with documents from our school, but they've been denied a visa stamp. Port of entry information, I think, would come from Homeland Security. And again, Assistant Secretary Myers can speak to that. We can tell you at our schools that, for example, every year we have a few students to whom we offer admission, and they cannot get visas. They generally cannot prove that they intend to go home, so it's the non-immigrant intent, as far as we know, the non-immigrant intent issue, not the security issue that prevents them from coming. And we do deferrals, hoping that they can have a little more time to get visa stamps, and they're still denied. But the reasons for those are not made known to us generally.
One last question, if I can. I was under the impression that prior to 9/11, we brought in some, you know, this is not necessarily students, but like 300,000 professionals under a certain visa. Do you know the number of students that have actually come in and how it's changed from 9/11 to now?
I'm sorry, I don't have that information memorized, but the IIE Open Doors report tracks that every year, and that information is available in terms of students, scholars, professors, researchers, Fs and Js, and it's broken down in multiple categories, by country, by field of study, by whether they're graduates or undergraduate students. So that data is available.
Okay, but you don't know right off in terms of if there's been any major dramatic change?
I think what we've seen in general, you know, certainly just after 9/11, there were issues with people being afraid to come. We've seen the numbers climb again, although not as quickly as they were climbing before 9/11. And what we're seeing is not that the numbers are dropping, but rather that our market share is changing. And so the number of students available in the U.S., available to come to the U.S. or elsewhere, is high enough that we are still increasing, but other countries are also pulling students away from the U.S.
Gentleman's time's expired.
Thank you.
We do have this IIE data, which we'll insert at this point in the record, that will indicate the trends the gentleman is inquiring about. Ms. Granger?
I have no questions of this witness. Thank you.
Ms. Serrano?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Sometimes members are pretty sure that we know how a lot of these things work, only to be embarrassed in public and admitting we don't. So help me here. If someone is sitting somewhere in France, for instance, and wants to attend Duke, they decide over there that they want to attend Duke. Does ICE or our State Department, our government get involved before Duke does? Or is it happen at the same time? Or is it Duke that lets the State Department know, or the Immigration Department know, that this student is applying for Duke?
Very good question. Normally what will happen is that students will choose the schools to which they'd like to apply, as any domestic student would. So they might apply to only one school in the U.S., they might apply to several, they might apply to schools around the world. Duke receives those applications, and then we review them in a competitive manner. We make our selections. Once we've admitted a student, only then are we permitted to issue the I-20, which is the document saying that they can come to the U.S. in F-1 status. So no one in the government generally would know about them at the application stage or at our review stage. But once we've done the admission and we've determined that that student needs a visa to come to the U.S., we would then issue the I-20 out of the SEVIS system, which would notify the federal government that Duke has admitted the student and that we have verified that they have adequate funding, that they are admitted competitively, that they have the background to come to Duke. And then that information, in theory, would go into the Homeland Security system and would then be available to the Department of State and to the consular officers abroad. We would then mail the document, the I-20, to the student, who would then take that along with their ID information to the embassy, get the visa stamp and the passport. The embassy would do the appropriate security checks. They would then board a plane and come to the port of entry, where their identity would be verified again. And after coming into the port of entry, they would report to the school. And upon reporting to the school, we would notify through SEVIS that they had indeed arrived and reported to the school as expected.
Okay, I'm the easiest person in Congress when it comes to letting people come into the country. Gets me in trouble for saying that, but it's truth. But yet, from what I hear from you, I have to ask the question, at what point do we find out if the person is a security risk to the nation?
In theory, that would happen first at the consular post, because the consular post would do an initial security background check. The students, any applicant for a visa has to fill out a list of...
That's prior to you knowing that they're applying?
No, they would apply first.
Okay.
And we would admit them based on their academic credentials. That's what we know.
Right.
So we would do the admission, and we would send them the document saying that academically they are ready to come to the U.S. They would then take that documentation to the embassy or consulate to get their visa stamp, and they could not get the visa stamp until they had passed whatever security reviews were appropriate.
That's clear. Thank you.
Ms. Kilpatrick.
Good morning. You've been very instructive. Thank you very much. I come from Michigan, so Duke University and the Blue Devils have always been a spur in our side. But we like you, Go Blue, too. So we like you. We've been very competitive over all these years. I want to ask a couple questions in terms of a trend as it relates to what's happening in terms of admissions at the university. I see a chart here. If you were to just gauge at your university over the last decade, have foreign admissions gone up or down? And at what percent, if either?
Foreign admissions have gone up, and I think that would be true at many universities across the U.S. There were some difficulties after 9/11, but I think in general, if you look at a decade, at the last 10 years, we've certainly seen admissions go up. At Duke, I'd say in that time, we've gone from maybe 6% of our population up to close to 10% of our student population being international. We've certainly seen the shifts that everyone's seen in terms of countries. Duke has a lot of students from China and Korea. We also have, our share from Canada and Australia and so on. But you'll see those trends across the U.S. In terms of the kinds of students who come here. And then what we see as well at Duke, and I have to say, Duke, every school has its own reasons for why its trends appear the way they do. And Duke has been working on undergraduate financial aid, which has certainly increased the number of applications that we get from international students and scholars, so that they now have financially the opportunity to come to Duke as well.
University-based financial aid.
Yes, and we just got, yes, university-based, because they're not eligible for federal taxpayer financial aid. And we just got a $20 million grant from the Karsh family, specifically devoted to undergraduate financial aid for international students. So
And
we expect
is the Karsh family alumni? Okay.
So we will expect then to see some shifts in trends in terms of the kinds of students that might not have considered us in the past because of the financial problems, that we may now see excellent students from families who can really take back a different view of America.
I see. And you mentioned China and India. What are your top three countries who wish to come to Duke?
I'd say right now our tops are probably China, India, and then it starts to sort of drift off after that. A fairly large Korean population, certainly the English-speaking countries, if you bunch them all together, you get Canada, Australia, the UK.
And do the students tend to go back to their countries after they've completed the Duke education?
Excellent question. I think you will find across the country that those students who are in the sciences will very often stay and do optional practical training. They have at least a year after they graduate to work in the U.S. and do optional practical training. I believe that there's consideration now at Homeland Security and in ICE to expand that to perhaps 29 months. I think many students do choose to stay for a period of time, and some will, in the sciences and in computer work and so on, will choose to stay and make careers here. But we also find that they like to keep contacts at home. We are seeing a global student, not just the international students, but our domestic students as well. And we're starting to see a population of students graduating who think of the world as where they work.
I see.
And who will stay, but also travel back and forth, build relationships.
Global student,
Yeah,
good word.
global
Good
students.
word. And then lastly, the fee increase, the 100% increase. Are you recommending none, or that we do some part of that, or decrease it, or give us a little
Oh, if we could have it for free, we would take it for free.
Okay, that's not an option. That's not an option.
No problem. We do understand that the law itself mandates a kind of self-payment in the SEVA system. We would like to see no fee increase because it does send a very negative message. If we have to see a fee increase, we would like to send that message along with, as I mentioned in my testimony, a list of advantages that comes with that it's a one-time fee or a 10-year fee, that students don't have to pay later for optional practical training, that's something that the schools would manage, that there would be other benefits, the ability to look at their own files, those kinds of things that we could say to students, it's going to cost more, but we're giving you so much more for it.
I see.
That would help us sell that a lot easier.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Mr. Farr.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. We sit here in the Homeland Security Committee and sometimes forget that the first line of our national security is a well-educated electorate. And I think the pot of gold that the United States has for the world is our higher education system, and the fact that we attract the best and the brightest minds in the world that want to come and study. I've also watching developments abroad, Singapore, for example. They're trying to rob our seed corn by providing easier access and better accommodations and I think countries around the world. And if we don't pay attention to this issue, we're going to lose that special ability to be the creative country. So I'm very interested in how we really make sure that our institutions of higher learning, and I represent 6 of them, that students have access to that around the world. And what we hear when we travel is kind of a mixed message. From one, as constituent work, I get nothing but sort of dumb problems that are by individuals that are trying to come into this country. When we go abroad and we just return, the answer from the embassies is we process these things very rapidly. They told us, interesting, about 1/3 of the documents for being students are falsified in the host country, and they really don't have that legitimacy. But of those that, and they said that it depends on, they have to get assurances that the students have paid all their fees. Well, some of these schools here in the United States are very expensive. So, and I wonder about this return assurance. How can you tell that an 18, 19-year-old student is, the only way we tell when we give visitors visas is that they have to be rich. We don't allow poor people in this country. It seems the only exception of allowing poor people in this country is in academia. And I wondered how we do that, because if, are there scholarships involved, and is there turning away a lot of students? And lastly, in your opinion, do you think we're only taking in rich students? And I would hope that what you might do in your professional association is that we get, whenever we travel abroad, and I always bring this question up, is that everything's working fine. But in my district office in California, there's a day go by that I don't get a call about some foreign lecturer who's now stuck at the airport and being told to return because when they were a student at Berkeley in the 60s, they participated in an anti-war rally, and they've been in the country half a dozen times since then, but now they're going to be sent back. That students can't get here in time for the semester to begin because the paperwork's stuck in the consulate. And so I think we need to have kind of a report on what I call the dumb stuff that's going on out there that prevents students from getting in here that should be, so that you can do your business of trying to best educate students, regardless of where they're from in the world.
I appreciate that summary of the experiences of our students and scholars. And I think that when you go to the embassies and consulates and say, how are you doing, what are you doing, they certainly are making best efforts, I think, to review properly, to let people in properly. At one time, students were waiting many, many months, as were the J1 scholars, just to get interviews, because right after 9/11, there were mandatory interviews, and many consulates were not set up to accept interviews because they hadn't done it for years. You know, London hadn't been doing interviews for a very long time. But the Department of State has advised consular posts that F1 students and J1 students and scholars should have priority interviews, so they are getting interviews earlier. I understand from Department of State, and I would recommend that you talk with them, that they are in the future probably not going to require in-person interviews for extensions. But I think the kinds of concerns that you are hearing from people individually have to do with the non-immigrant intent issue, where a student will come in and they won't say, no, your visa's denied. They'll say, well, we can't give it to you now. We need to have more information that shows that you will go home again. Come back when you could give us more information. And at some embassies, that is, come back in X number of weeks. We won't see you tomorrow. We will only see you X number of weeks from today. So I think the non-immigrant intent issue is one of the most common denial, delay problems that we see. And the inability to show non-immigrant intent. And you're quite right that an 18-year-old in the U.S., certainly their intention when they go to college is not to come home and live with mom and dad. Their intention is to go out into the world. And it's nearly impossible for an 18-year-old to show that they have a business that they own back home.
How many don't show up for the beginning of the semester? Because of delays in the embassy? I mean, is it a common percentage that don't get there when classes start because of backlog?
I can say at Duke that we probably have maybe half a dozen every year that have difficulties of some kind. Some get resolved and some do not. That is, different schools have different experiences. At Duke, we have only the 1,900 or so F1 population. There are schools in the country that have many thousands of F1 students, and of course, their numbers of denials and delays would be much higher. Also at Duke, the population that's coming to us frequently have contacts at home. They have families with businesses. They have, you know, dad who says, when you get your MBA, you can come back and work in the family company. And so different populations of students will have different experiences.
Thank you. Ms. Robel-Allard.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I apologize for being late, but we have 3 hearings going on at the same time. And my understanding is that much of what I wanted to talk about and discuss this morning has already been asked. So this is a little bit of a follow-up question on an issue that I believe has already been covered. As you know, educational institutions across the country recognize the importance of SEVIS, but they have indicated to me that the program is very burdensome and that DHS is not providing the training to university staff who use the system. What kind of training are universities currently receiving from DHS as part of this program, and how do you feel that this training could be improved?
Thank you. Homeland Security has put a great deal of information online for schools to access. So, for example, if I'm training a new advisor in my office, that information is available to go and read. But it's generally not in-person training. It's online materials. Organizations like NAFSA, Association of International Educators, provides direct in-person workshops and sessions at their regional and national conferences, and they try to do that when they can in cooperation with Homeland Security, but those are generally professional association workshops on how to manage the government system. They are not workshops presented by the government. So much of the training that someone receives in how to manage the reporting part of SEVIS happens either online or through the professional associations. There's a slightly different approach when you're looking at managing the hardware, software, database side of it. and a different group with which to work, and I can't speak in depth about database management, but certainly that is a different part of the concern in terms of SEVIS. Will our systems talk to their systems, and how well will they talk to each other? And can we get data across as we need to? And I mentioned in my testimony that when SEVIS first started accepting batch submissions, Duke had the dubious distinction of bringing the whole national system to a halt because we sent too many batch requests at the same time, and the system didn't know how to handle that many requests at once. So those are little glitches that we've tried to fix over the years. We would like to see SEVIS 2 look carefully at the hardware, software side of this in terms of making that flow with what institutions already have in place, because we are already managing huge data systems on our own campuses for various reporting purposes, to report to Department of Education, to report for financial aid. So we already have those in place, and we'd like to be sure they articulate. Thank you, yes. The folks at Homeland Security, I think, have done a good job of coming to stakeholders, and they've held stakeholder meetings with institutions from a number of different kinds of institutions, the four-year colleges, the major research institutions like Duke, small community colleges, things like that. So there has been ongoing communication. I think we are still concerned on the academic side that the security issues generally will take precedence over some of the enhancements that we would like to see on the academic side. In particular, the J program has not been incorporated into SEVIS quite so well, I think, as the F1 program. And the difficulty ongoing that we see is that regulations and the computers don't necessarily track each other, and we are getting regulation by computer, such that the academic community is trying to do the academic part of reporting, and the system won't accept our reports or won't let us do what the regulations say we can or we must do. So we'd like to certainly see an improvement in that regard.
And you are working towards that?
And we are certainly working with Homeland Security on that.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, and thank you, Ms. Cotton, for very helpful testimony. We appreciate your coming here today, and we'll, I'm sure, benefit in many ways from not just the very specific suggestions you made about your relationship with ICE, but also some of the broader issues involving our attempt to be a welcoming country for students and researchers from abroad.
Will the chairman yield briefly?
Certainly.
I want to compliment the witness. We hear a lot of witnesses testify before us in Congress. You've been very effective and very helpful in helping us understand this process, but you've been very, very effective. We appreciate your testimony.
Thank you. Now let me call forward Assistant Secretary Julie Myers, the Assistant Secretary for Immigration and Customs Enforcement. Ms. Myers, we appreciate your patience. We obviously had, to begin this hearing this morning, we had a witness and a topic that attracted a lot of interest and a lot of questions. So we're a little bit later in bringing you on than we had hoped to be, but I think it was time well spent, and we certainly appreciate your presence here today. And we'll ask you, if you will, as usual, to summarize your testimony in 5 or 6 minutes, and then let us explore further in questions. We will put your entire statement in the hearing record.
with our foreign students, and in the development not only of the SEVIS system, but the pre-SEVIS system, and how instrumental she and many other institutions have been as we work to see how we can improve the compliance of students, encouraging foreign students to come into our country. It is my privilege today to appear before you this morning to discuss the President's fiscal year 2009 budget request for U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement. I want to thank the committee for its support of ICE during the past 4 years. Because of your support, we are leveraging the broad authorities by aligning them with the risks that face the nation today. Our risk-based approach extends from interior immigration enforcement, in which we are prioritizing criminal aliens and fugitives, to the application of our customs frauds authorities to prevent the importation of tainted commodities and counterfeit pharmaceuticals. This risk-based approach shapes our methods to target drugs and other contraband smuggling with financial authorities and international partnerships, and it means we will continue to work to thwart the illegal export of weapons and sensitive technology. The people at ICE have a tremendous responsibility. The work that they do each day is difficult and often dangerous. Yet I can think of nothing more important for a public servant than to help safeguard this great nation and to protect its citizens. I'm proud to state for the record that ICE employees carry out their mission with great care, extraordinary compassion, and unrivaled commitment. ICE has made progress in immigration enforcement through innovation and more effective internal oversight. With the committee's support, ICE is transforming the way we identify and go after individuals who pose a threat to our communities. In particular, thanks to the committee's support, we are aggressively developing an ambitious plan to identify, prioritize, detain, and remove from the United States all criminal aliens in federal, state, and local custody. We are also working more cooperatively than ever with our state and local law enforcement partners through ICE's Access program. Unfortunately, some of the most dangerous criminals and sophisticated criminal organizations are not behind bars. For this reason, ICE has developed robust initiatives to enforce our immigration laws in the interior, including programs that specifically target child predators and gang members, ensure compliance on the part of those who visit the United States for school or simply to tour, and to target alien absconders, fugitives who failed to comply with a lawful judicial order to leave the country, as well as focusing on dismantling the infrastructure that supports illegal immigration, such as illegal employment and fraudulent document trade. While the immigration enforcement initiatives I described most often relate to people trying to come into this country, another key risk we guard against involves efforts to take sensitive technology and arms out. In fiscal year 2007, arms and strategic technology investigations resulted in 188 arrests, 178 indictments, and 127 convictions for export-related violations, more than any other U.S. federal law enforcement agency. One undercover operation resulted in guilty pleas by 6 individuals to charges of weapons and ammunition, money laundering, and material support to a designated foreign terrorist organization. Other dangers are less obvious. Traditional customs fraud, in many cases, constitutes serious and unrecognized public health risks. Take, for example, Operation Guardian, an ICE-led operation where we work with CBP, the FDA, and the Consumer Product Safety Commission, and where we investigate imports of substandard, tainted, and dangerous products from the PRC and other countries. The operation to date has resulted in the seizure of more than 59,000 tubes of diethylene glycol and bacteria-laden toothpaste bound for the U.S. markets and the initiation of several joint U.S. PRC investigations. Diethylene glycol, by the way, is a toxic chemical used to make antifreeze. And this is just one of many similar investigations involving tainted goods which would otherwise be on store shelves just waiting for purchase by American families. As I mentioned, our risk-based approach also shapes our methods to target drug and other contraband smuggling. With only 25% of our special agents authorized to conduct drug smuggling investigations, we seized 1.2 million pounds of narcotics, including 232 pounds of cocaine. This kind of approach, focusing on risk and going after the money, has resulted in some real results. Since 2003, ICE has seized more than $600 million in cash and monetary instruments and more than $580 million worth of real property, vessels, art craft, artwork, vehicles, and jewels. FPS has also intercepted 760,000 prohibited items and stopped 23,000 people from entering federal buildings. Many of the requests included in the FY09 budget today directly support these priorities, and they are discussed in greater detail in my statement I've submitted to the committee. I want to thank the committee for all the support it's given ICE, and I look forward to answering your questions.
Thank you very much, Ms. Myers, and we'll begin with questions. I'm sure we have a lot to explore. I want to initially raise the issue of how ICE is identifying and tracking criminal aliens for eventual deportation, both what you've done and what you intend to do in this area. We're talking about criminal aliens held in custody, in penal custody. There are an estimated 600,000 criminal aliens in prison. Thousands more are sentenced every year. I'm worried still that many of these are remaining unidentified, although I know you've begun to work on this challenge. It appears, though, at the rate you're going, it'll take 4 to 5 years to find them all, to have a truly comprehensive system. Data that ICE provided our subcommittee staff last summer clearly showed that there was a lot of work left to do, and the latest data we have from the ICE text system shows that criminal deportations increased only 7% from 2005 to 2007, while non-criminal deportations over the same period increased nearly 60%. Now, as you well know, our 2008 bill, incorporated in the omnibus, provided $200 million for ICE to improve and modernize efforts to identify and remove aliens convicted of a crime, sentenced to imprisonment, and who may be deportable, and to remove them from the United States once they are judged deportable. The 2008 Act requires you to submit a plan to the committee describing the strategy that ICE will develop to identify every criminal alien at the prison, jail, or correctional institution at which they're held, the process ICE will use in conjunction with the Department of Justice to remove every criminal alien judged deportable, the methodology ICE will develop for identifying and prioritizing for removal criminal aliens convicted of violent crimes, and finally, the activities, milestones, and resources necessary for implementing the strategy and process to remove criminal aliens judged deportable. Now, this report is due to the committee, as you know, on March 25th. I have a few questions about it now. First of all, how far along are you in developing this plan? Will we have it by the March 25th deadlines? What are the major challenges you've identified so far? How are you going to fix them? And then finally, the money. We provided $200 million for you to begin to implement this plan and allow, this is $200 million beyond the request, $200 million, so to speak, in new money, to begin to implement this plan, and allowed the funding to be used in 2008 and 2009 because we thought the program would begin slowly in 2008. However, we also required in law that the 2009 budget identify the resources and staffing necessary to continue the identification and removal of criminal aliens. So I'm surprised that the 2009 budget contains no additional funding for this important activity. So I hope you could tell us that, but first, if you will, please let us know how far you are along in developing this plan and also addressing the underlying challenge.
Certainly, Chairman, and I want to thank you again for your support and all the support of your staff over the past 2 years as we work to increase the number of criminal aliens that we identify in correctional institutions. And in fact, I think we have made some good progress over the past 2 years, although, as you note, there is much work still to be done. One of the things that we are doing is charging a significantly higher number of criminal aliens in prisons today than we were yesterday and than we were last year. And all of those aliens may not get out of prison tomorrow, but when they do, they are either have gone through the immigration process or are going through the immigration process, and they'll be deported. In fact, back in 2006, we issued charging documents on 57,000 criminal aliens in federal, state, and local institutions. In fiscal year 2007, we issued 164,000 charging documents on aliens incarcerated in federal, state, and local institutions. And in fiscal year 2008, I anticipate we will issue over 200,000 charging documents on aliens in federal, state, and local institutions. Over the past 2 years, we've looked at a couple of things as we've kind of divided up the problem, and then we've used kind of the $200 million and the impetus of the strategic plan that the committee has so wisely encouraged us to develop as a way to move forward in a more transformational way. Over the past 2 years, we first looked at where some of our biggest gaping holes were. And of course, first I believe that a gaping hole was with respect to federal institutions. We did not have full coverage at all federal institutions. We fixed that back in the middle of 2006 with our Deport Center, which screens every federal institution in the Bureau of Prisons custody. We next realized that we needed to have a full and comprehensive understanding of all federal, state, and local institutions in the United States so that we could begin to target our resources based on risk and to make sure that we were using our limited resources in the most effective way. So we developed a tiered system identifying all 4,492 institutions and ranked them into 4 tiers based on risk. It's still a very primitive, and we're now in version 2.0 of our risk assessment, but it helped us, particularly with the 30 teams the committee gave us last year, to make sure we're using those teams in the highest priority areas. Now, with respect to the strategic plan, we looked at how can we really transform what we're doing to make sure we can meet my goal and the committee's goal of identifying every single alien in every single institution, even if that alien is only there, is kind of going through the turnstiles, only there a very, very short time. We realize that what we really need to do is take what we've done on risk and leverage the interoperability initiatives that are going on with FBI, CJIS, and other places and see how we can use technology where we may not have people full-time stationed to identify aliens. And that is what our plan is going to do. It's going to show how we will use interoperability to identify aliens in institutions where we may not have a full-time presence, and then use that to then prioritize them based on several risk categories, aggravated felons down to those who may have committed more minor criminal offenses. We are working very hard on this program. Jason Foley, our Director of Budget, has been full-time assigned to this temporarily, and we're looking to hire a program manager to really take this program and make sure that it will succeed even beyond the time that I'm at ICE. I think in terms of some of the challenges that we face, we do face getting the interoperability kind of moving as quickly as we like and as effectively as we like. I think we've had some great cooperation from FBI, CJIS, and U.S. Visit at DHS, who really have owned interoperability for DHS, but we are now asking to use interoperability in a much more aggressive way than we were a year ago, 2 years ago, and so that is going to be a challenge. I think that's going to be an area to push. I think we're also going to have some challenges even as just the 200,000 aliens we've currently identified are getting out of jail, is actually getting all those people home. And one thing that we deal with foreign countries is as the rate of criminal aliens increases, there are some difficulties with ensuring that we can remove those people, and also figure out how we're not going to unduly burden the immigration courts, our prosecutors, et cetera. That's why we're looking at some innovative approaches such as Rapid Repat, which is a program we developed based on successes in New York and Arizona, where you take nonviolent inmates who are eligible for parole. Of course, it depends on the state. You give them some extra good time for agreeing to cooperate with their removal. That saves the state money. In many state prisons are overcrowded. It saves the federal government money. So those are the kind of innovative things, and I think we'll need innovative, transformative things in order to make this program succeed. But we're going to get it to you on the date it's due, but probably not much before. But we're working very, very hard on it, Mr. Chairman.
Well, we look forward to getting that report, and also to working with you to make sure this happens. Am I correct in assuming that there is no higher priority for your agency in terms of deportation than incarcerated criminal aliens?
Well, there's no higher priority. One of my top priorities is certainly incarcerated criminal aliens. Some of the most serious criminal aliens are unfortunately out on the street. And so that is also a very high priority for me, to make sure that we're identifying those individuals and targeting. But absolutely, identifying incarcerated criminal aliens is something that's got to be a top ICE priority, and it has been, and it's going to continue to be.
Well, that does raise the question about whether there are competing priorities that are somehow making this effort less, making this effort proceed less expeditiously or less efficiently? I mean, is the rough estimate that we came up with that it's going to take 4 or 5 years at this rate to have a truly comprehensive program? Is that still accurate, or are we able to improve on that?
Well, certainly we are seeking to move as quickly as we can. I think that where we are going to have, where the challenge is for us, is in how we can move interoperability kind of most quickly, and how we can make sure that there's a framework that supports the interoperability. So that is where the challenge for us is, but we are strongly committed. We've dedicated our best people to this, and we want to make this a success, and we're going to make this a success for this committee and for the American people.
What about the time frame that we're looking at?
Well, you know, it is obviously going to be a challenging, you know, it's a challenging process for us. As you've seen, we've almost tripled the number of criminal aliens that we've charged already. You know, as those people are getting out, we're trying to get them home as quickly as we can and do this the most effectively. There's certainly going to be a challenge, Mr. Chairman, and what I would propose is, as we continue to kind of finalize the report with our other interagency partners, that we can continue to come up and brief you before and after March 25th, so that you are ensured that it's a time frame that meets with your approval.
Well, the question I'm trying to get at, though, is what are the most significant obstacles we face here? Obviously, this is a big challenge, and it's a big problem, and it's not acceptable to have people who we know are capable and willing to harm our citizens. It's not acceptable to have those people back out on the streets. And what I'm trying to grasp is to what extent the problems are technical, and you talk about the interoperability issues. There, I'm sure, some formidable technical issues here. Is this something that just simply can't be speeded up with the devotion of enough effort and resources? Are we dealing with a kind of intractable set of problems here, or is this something that's going to yield to our best efforts?
I think we are going to be successful with our best efforts. I will say there are some technical problems. There are some logistical problems that we need to make sure we work through. For example, in my home state of Kansas, we currently have 5 or 6 ICE agents that cover the whole state. And there are obviously many more jails than that in the state of Kansas. And so, you know, those are the kinds of challenges that we have. Certain parts of the state may only see an alien come through the doors of their jail, you know, every other week, every other thing. So it's how do we use technology to make sure we're using our resources the most effective way that we can. But I want to assure you that we're working very, very hard on the strategic plan. We're in version 27 right now. We've been really, really working to get something that the committee will be happy with, and you can see that this is a top priority of mine. I don't want my successor to have to deal with this problem. I want it to be a place where kind of we're moving forward in a proactive manner, so that we can tell the American people, yes, we have solved this problem, as you would expect.
And you're confident that that the resources we've provided for 08 and 09 are sufficient? And is there anything we need to know about the omission of further funding from the 09 request?
Well, as I'm sure you're aware, Mr. Chairman, the timing of your generous $200 million was after the President's budget for 09 than had been submitted. Certainly, there are high numbers of aliens that will be coming in kind of year after year, and we will need to be working with you to make sure that we get kind of the right amount of money as we're rolling this out and as we're becoming most effective.
Well, it's true the omnibus was late in passing. It's also true that the $200 million was included in the House bill, and if there was any sure bet one could make, it would be that would be in the omnibus.
I understand that, Mr. Chairman.
You know, so we will be wanting to monitor very carefully the funding requirements here and what the needs might be. Mr. Rogers.
Well, this is a forbidding task that you're up against here. There are some 5,050 federal, state, and local detention facilities nationwide. My understanding is you have established some sort of relations with 2,000 of those. Correct me on any of this. And I would assume that most of those 5,050 facilities are local, as opposed to being federal or state.
That's right. And we actually have some relationship with every single one of the facilities in this country. It's just the relationship may be just knowing who the ICE duty agent is and who to call, as opposed to actually having a kind of a presence in the building or kind of a standard protocol for sharing the information.
Well, since most of these are probably county jails, city jails, holding facilities, what have you, how are you going to make contact with those county jails, and how are they going to determine whether or not some prisoner they have in their jail is in fact an alien?
Currently, we have made some contact with the state and local jails, the county jails. Of course, in some, we actually have a physical presence or we have an agreed-upon relationship. But others, we've just made contact through the letter and the ICE point of contact. I think what we're seeking to do in the areas where we don't have full screening, and that's what we want to get to, is full screening of all aliens, and we're going to prioritize that based on risk, criminal risk, starting with the most dangerous criminals first, is what we're going to do is look to see how we can leverage the IDENT-IAFIS interoperability so that when they bring somebody into their custody, what they can do is to run their information, have that be shared back with us. That information is then shared electronically through our databases so we can determine whether or not the individual is illegal. So that is what our goal is, to get to some place where we're using technology as opposed to having to have an agent or a DRO officer go over there and do the interview in the first instance. Of course, you will have to do an interview and things later on, but to kind of leverage technology to get through some of the first steps when they don't really know where to go.
But you're not, are you planning at some point in time in having biometric identification of the prisoner?
Yes, yeah, the interoperability is designed to encompass the biometrics, to a sharing of the biometric information. So we absolutely are interested in using that, and we think that that's really the only way that we'll get to the goal that you have and the chairman has and the committee has in terms of identifying criminal aliens. And one thing I will say is that, Mr. Chairman and Ranking Member Rogers, we do think we are going to have to particular alien and based on what a particular state's interest is. In some states, they may only be interested in identifying our counties, the aggravated felons, and that's the same sort of issue we deal with right now with certain sanctuary cities or other things. In some places, they may be interested in identifying and making sure kind of every alien down to those who are arrested for a traffic ticket are kind of moved through the ICE process. We do think that we are going to have to take that into account, and that will certainly affect the budgeting for this proposal in the out years.
Well, what's in it for the county jailer? Why should they fool with all of this? Because there's nothing in it for them, is there?
Well, it gets that individual off their streets permanently and gets them on their way back home to their home country. And so that, you're certainly right, that there may be some jails that don't want to deal with us. Indeed, we dealt with that up in New Jersey over the past year. We've had that in other places. So certainly there may be challenges. I think, generally speaking, correctional institutions at all levels have been more interested in working with us, particularly for kind of the worst of the worst. And so then when you're talking about kind of prioritizing the criminal aliens, I think when you think about someone who commits rape, commits murder, commits violent activities, most individuals are going to want to get them off the street of their community and get them sent back home if they're here illegally.
Well, we obviously wish you well in this regard. This is a high priority for all of us. But I do want to make the point that we should not let this or anything else interfere with the apprehension of at-large fugitives who are criminal aliens. Many, many more of them on the streets than are behind bars, right?
That's right.
And assumedly, if they are dangerous criminal aliens, they can certainly do the public harm being at large as opposed to somebody locked behind the bars.
That's absolutely right. Just a few weeks ago, we arrested in Congressman Farr's district an individual that had a number of criminal convictions, including rape, escape from jail, and other things. And that was an individual that we got off the streets of Salinas and we're sending back home. So those are dangerous criminals that are out there in the streets. But we absolutely have to do a good job in the jails as well.
Well, quickly changing complete points here. Let me ask you quickly about the money in the budget request for '09 for detaining illegal aliens on a daily basis that you apprehend. You have requested monies for 1,000 additional beds, daily beds, on top of the '08 level, so that the total bed space supported in your budget request is 33,000 beds, as opposed to 30,500 for '07. Is that sufficient to allow you to keep away from catch and release?
Yes, it is. In fact, the referrals from CBP, they were to ICE. They were about 180,000 in fiscal year 2005. They were less than 50,000 in fiscal year 2007. And so CBP and the Border Patrol have really noticed a drop in apprehensions across the border. We are continuing to use more and more of our bed space for the 287G program, mainly arrests referred to as for jails, the CAP program, the jail program itself, and other interior enforcements. Certainly, we have to be use our beds as efficiently as we can, and we'll continue to work on initiatives and things to reduce the amount of time individuals spend in our custody.
Well, and what about the conditions at those facilities? Are they humane?
Ranking Member Rogers, I think we've taken a number of steps over the past 2 years to ensure that those who are in our custody are treated appropriately. Under my leadership, we've developed the Detention Field Inspection Group, which goes out and does spot inspections of various facilities. This is an independent arm under the Office of Professional Responsibility. We also have developed family residential standards, new family residential standards. We also have, for our 40 largest facilities, quality assurance specialists. So somebody whose job in, day out, their only job is to make sure that the facilities live up to the ICE detention standards. And finally, we have actually also have some additional kind of private people that are doing inspections for us. It used to be kind of a collateral duty within DRO, but now we use the Nakamoto Group and others to do inspections for us to make sure that our facilities are living up to the ICE detention standards. But as you note, we've grown considerably in the amount of bed space over the past couple of years. I want to make sure that every facility that we're meeting the ICE detention standards and the new ICE performance-based standards that we're developing over this next year.
You are proposing, well, the Secretary and Attorney General Mukasey announced the other day a 25% increase for fines levied against employers who knowingly hire illegal aliens. That's the first boost, I think, in probably a decade or so. Mm-hmm. What do you think about it?
I think it is long overdue, and so I'm pleased that they are increasing the fines by 25%. I think that will be useful for us. One of the things that we have found is that the civil fine process was actually also very cumbersome, and it made it very difficult to proceed through that. And so we're looking internally to see how can we streamline the procedures to make that easier for the egregious employers that are knowingly hiring illegal aliens. I still think for the really egregious ones, for the ones that have as their business practice hiring illegal aliens, the best deterrent, if they're not going to comply, is pursuit of appropriate felony charges.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Mr. Rodriguez.
Thank you, Madam Secretary, and thank you very much for the work that you've been doing. Let me indicate to you that I represent part of the Del Rio sector that had that catch and deport, and I was wondering how that's going and how we might be able to kind of implement that a little quicker or a little more in some of the other areas in the role that you've been playing in that area.
Do you mean Operation Streamline?
I don't know what you call it. We just catch them and deport them, and that's brought down the numbers. Is that operation? There's so many operations out there, linebacker and a whole bunch of others. This one has been working pretty good in that area, and the numbers have decreased.
Right. I think there are two kind of related things. We have ended the practice of catch and release all along the southern border and the northern border, including in your area as well as all other areas along the southern and northern border, and we anticipate we'll be able to continue to maintain that practice where non-Mexican aliens are not released into society with the money that we're seeking for FY09. With respect to Operation Streamline, which I believe has also been going on down in your area, that's a program that is basically full prosecution for individuals who enter without inspection. And the Border Patrol really is in charge of that, working with the Department of Justice, and they're looking for targeted areas along the southwest border where that might make sense. They have seen that apprehensions have dropped significantly in certain areas where they've done Operation Streamline, and I know in the Yuma sector, for example, where they've also done it, they've seen other crime drop as well. And so I think that they are seeing some positive, although, limited pilot, things from this program. And I know both the Secretary and the Attorney General are interested in using it in a responsible way, given the limitations on
Yeah,
DOJ.
and it has worked, and I know it includes the federal judges and others, and so let us know what we might be able to do to expedite that. Secondly, we had a question earlier about, I know we've been having about 500,000 students come in every year, up to 600, close to 600, a little less than 600,000 students. What do we do on international students from a Homeland perspective? And I was specifically, in terms of assessing them as they come in.
Well, in terms of assessing them as they come in, the primary responsibility for that is with the State Department through the visa issue.
So Homeland Security doesn't play a role there?
Well, we do in the locations where we have a visa security unit or in some other kind of limited locations, but generally speaking.
Did you have any role in assessing those 20-something thousand Saudis that came in under a special program under the administration?
We've had some role in those, so it depends on kind of the particular, particular
What role
location.
did you have on those?
Well, we work with the State Department, who has final authority, visa issuing authority, and then we also can look, after individuals come in, if there's a problem, that's really where our responsibility then lies. And then in a particular example that you give, if we'd heard that there was kind of fraud or something else, then we would go back and look at the visa applications or other things and try to see what that is.
Were you engaged in that particular project with the Saudis? You said you were? And what, did you find any fraud or anything?
With respect to, and I guess I'm not sure what I can say in an open setting here.
Okay.
But so maybe if I could
Okay, sure. I
provide this to
understand.
you
Yeah, no
offline after the
problem.
hearing.
Okay. Was that kind of unique, that specific program for the Saudis, or is that something that occurs with other nations?
Well, I think certainly the broader scholarship program is, is somewhat unique, although other places do have scholarship programs kind of with the Saudis. Our role at ICE is really usually kind of focusing on after they get here, how we track them. And so one of the things we've done from the DHS perspective, as you heard Ms. Cotton talk about, is we're looking to improve SEVIS and move to SEVIS 2, which is our IT system that allows us to track federal students.
Okay. Have you overall just found, a more, in that area, is there a need for us to, you said you'd only get into it after there's referred to, I guess the FBI is the one that sends you the cases, or what?
Well, the State Department is responsible for the visa issuing process. Okay. We're responsible when the individuals are here. So we develop investigations and leads on our own when individuals are here in this country, working, of course, with other federal agencies. So
does the FBI have a role in that?
They do. It would depend on the particular kind of case. If the case appears to relate to terrorism, then the FBI might have a role in a particular investigation. And we work very, very closely with them, not only on the JTTF, but on other cooperative ventures. But I do think the overall program does need to be improved and moved to kind of the next generation. One of the things that we have a problem with in our IT system is it's paper-centric versus person-centric. So you heard Ms. Cotton talk about the I-20s that they send to every accepted student. If you don't want to take chances, you might apply to several schools. So you get several I-20s. Currently, our system tracks it by the I-20s, not by the person who comes in. So those are the kinds of things we're moving to do. We're making SEVIS 2 biometric-based and also working to try to ensure we have the interoperability that Ms. Cotton and others have talked about with the other school institutions.
Thank you. Mr. Culberson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Secretary Myers, appreciate the direction you're taking the agency, and I want to reinforce what the chairman and our ranking member, Mr. Rogers, pointed out, that apprehension and deportation of these criminal aliens is an absolute top priority for all of us, and which is why you saw the strong funding commitment from this committee, and we'll continue to do that. And also to thank my good friend Ciro Rodriguez. He and I working arm in arm along with Henry Cuellar on the border, and Ciro's exactly right. The Operation Streamline, we believe, is the win-win solution that we're looking for, Mr. Chairman. It is not something ICE is directly involved in. The crime rate has dropped 76% in Del Rio. The illegal crossings are at the lowest level they've been since they kept records in 1973. So it's a great success, and it's simply enforcing existing law, and the local community is very supportive of it. So I'll be working with you, Ciro, on that. And I just returned from a trip, and so I know Ciro's got to run, but I want to say that I just returned from a trip to Laredo, and in order to visit with them, talk to them about what they needed in the Laredo sector to continue to expand Streamline. They've begun to roll it out there in the Laredo sector, right next to Del Rio. And I want to, in particular, bring to your attention, Secretary Myers, and compliment your ICE agent, the special agent there in the Laredo sector, Janice Ayala, who just left, apparently, and Agent Todd Persigian, who were singled out for me to compliment them, to be sure that you knew what a great job they were doing in working with the local law enforcement authorities, and just absolutely bent over backwards to work with the Webb County Sheriff's Department. So you've got a great team there working on the Texas border, and all of us in the delegation, this is literally a bipartisan effort. All of us in Texas on the border are working arm in arm, and Streamline truly appears to be the solution that we're looking for, the win-win solution that then allows everything else, members, to all the other problems we've got with immigration sort of melt away once that border's secure, and Streamline's working beautifully. One problem I want to bring to your attention and ask about, and I'm going to be focusing on this very heavily with my colleagues, both in this subcommittee and my Department of Justice subcommittee, is the lack of prosecutions in the Tucson sector. In the Del Rio sector, everyone that is picked up, that is entered the United States without inspection, is prosecuted just as you would expect the local sheriff or police department. When they make an arrest, you have a 100% prosecution rate. State police pick somebody up, 100% prosecution rate. In Del Rio, they're picked up, 100% prosecution rate. That's the point of Streamline. In Laredo, they're at about 75% prosecution rate as they ramp this thing up. When I went to Tucson, I discovered that the Border Patrol, when they make an arrest, that even if you're carrying up to 500 pounds of marijuana, that you have a 99.6% chance of never being prosecuted. It's dumbfounding. In the Tucson sector, they're literally releasing, that because the U.S. Attorney will not prosecute them, 99.6% of all the people arrested by the Border Patrol are released because the U.S. Attorney won't prosecute them. So we'll be talking a lot about this in this subcommittee and in my other subcommittee. Can you talk to me about I know that you're picking people up both in the jails, but you're also, and we really want you to focus on picking them up off the street. The chairman and the ranking member exactly right. We want to get these dangerous criminal aliens off the streets as well. Can you talk to me about what has been the prosecution rate among those criminal aliens that you pick up off the street, those that you present to the U.S. attorneys? For example, in Arizona, that Arizona U.S. attorney is apparently, it's not just Border Patrol members. I talked FBI. When the FBI makes an arrest and presents it to the U.S. attorney in Arizona, she chooses not to prosecute the overwhelming majority. It's DEA, it's FBI, it's ATF. Are your officers having trouble getting the U.S. attorney in Arizona to prosecute?
Well, certainly, Congressman, I think that as federal agencies, we all want more of our cases to be accepted. And I think that your work in ensuring that they have resources so that they can take as many of the cases as possible would be terrific. And there's no question that not every case we want to have accepted is accepted. One thing that we're doing that's a little bit different than Streamline, but that the U.S. attorneys on the southwest border have appeared to embrace, is doing 1326 prosecutions in the jails. So getting the worst, identifying the worst of the worst in jails who've previously been deported and having them prosecuted prosecuted for 8 U.S.C. 1326
That's
again.
entry without inspection?
No, that's re-entry after deportation.
Oh, got it, okay, that's a
basically
felony, and
after-
that's a felony.
That's right, that's a felony. It's up to 10 years for these ag felons who we're going after, and they're very interested in those. And we started that in L.A., and now the other U.S. attorneys in the Southwest border are very interested in that. It keeps them off everybody's street for a longer period of time.
What percentage of those cases you present to the Arizona U.S. Attorney are prosecuted?
You know, we just started that in Arizona, so I'll have to get back to you on the precise number. But I think they are excited in it.
Yeah.
I do think I am a former prosecutor, so I am sympathetic on the resource constraints.
This is not resource. The U.S. Attorney in Arizona actually sent out a memo, members, that said, we will only prosecute the following list of cases. And they actually told the Border Patrol, we will not prosecute anybody that carries less than 500 pounds of marijuana. They sent that out on September 14th. I asked the Border Patrol, how long did it take for all the loads to come in at 499 pounds? They said about 48 hours. It's absurd. It's a 0.39% prosecution rate. It's not resources, it's policy that they're going to let everybody go. We've submitted a request. I really would like to know if you could, I know you don't have it on the tip of your tongue, what percentage of those cases that you present to the U.S. attorneys on the Southwest border are being prosecuted sector by sector? And then finally, if I could quickly ask about the Houston jail. The Houston jail, I understand, will not permit an ICE agent in the jail to actually look at people that are being brought in for booking. Do you know anything about that?
Well, I think we had made some progress recently with Houston after the unfortunate tragedy, a murder of a police officer by an illegal alien kind of out on the streets.
But you still don't have an agent in the Houston jail.
I don't believe we have an agent currently in the Houston jail. There are a lot of places where we get good information where we don't have a physical body. I'll have to get back to you on the particulars with.
But the Harris County jail, we do. And it's just city by city, Mr. Chairman, and it's something else we need to work on to make sure that our local facilities are working with ICE so you can do your job. Thank you very much.
Right. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Farr.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I thank you for being here today. I want to follow up on the chairman's request on this report you're due to us. As I understand, you have a $4.7 billion budget. You're the second largest law enforcement agency in the United States. You're not the Customs and Border Patrol, but you're an enforcement agency. And as I read the law, your highest responsibility in the law is to remove the criminal undocumented person from this country. Isn't that correct?
Certainly, finding and prioritizing criminal aliens as well as our customs responsibilities, you know, are our top priority.
So how many officers do you have? How many people that are authorized in your department to do background checks on people?
Do you mean how many people, and I'm sorry, just to clarify, you mean
It's
how many
not
people are
just an
working on
officer with a weapon, it's, you have people that are otherwise that could be doing background checks and detaining people for undocumented, being undocumented?
Yeah, our criminal alien program is actually run through detention and removal, and we currently have, we had 89 teams of that in fiscal year 07. We're going to have 119 teams this year.
Does that include the ones that issue warrants? That follow up on warrants?
Well, some of those might be warrants in jails, but separately, we do have fugitive operations
It's just
teams
the
that-
total number of people that could do this in your department.
That's 7,000 people on the
7,000
detention and removal
people.
side.
Well, if your highest priority is to remove those that have had criminal activity, why isn't that you can't just check every single jail in the United States? You've got people already, so to speak, in the can. You don't need to go out and chase them around the street and find them. They're there, they're behind bars. And for, you know, I think that there's a little bit of suffering of delusional esteem here, because you talked about how you're a great compassionate agency, and yet I don't know anybody in law enforcement locally that respects you. And I certainly have had more issues with the churches and those kinds of groups that reach out there for the way people have come in on warrant chases and just finding somebody standing in the wrong place and asking them for their papers and deporting them. Parents who have young children and things like that. I mean, there's a real problem here, because one question that a lot of the local law enforcement ask, and I think Mr. Rogers asked it in the last year, and certainly what led to this, is why can't we in this country, when local law enforcement, and I appreciate what you did in Salinas, but you didn't go in there and initiate that. That was the gang task force that called you when they were doing a gang raid, and unfortunately you could remove this person. But you didn't initiate that. That wasn't something that came, you were there as an assistance as part of the task force. But what my local law enforcement tells me is that you're not coming in and removing these people, even though, we would like them to even come in and just remove them because they don't have papers, but they've been arrested. They're going to be let out because they don't have enough to charge them for a crime, but they're spending a night in jail, and they've spent other nights in jail because they've been in and around a drug scene or a prostitution scene or a scene of crime, and law enforcement has no way of booking them, but they are probably and most likely undocumented. So it seems to me with the resources you have, that in this highest and the requirement in law, that there's no reason in the world that you can't be checking every single jail in this country, regardless of what it is. Not just those that have been convicted of crime and are sent to state prison or sent to the county jail for less than, a misdemeanor action, but why you just can't check every one of them all the time. It seems to me that would be a no-brainer.
Well, I appreciate very much your concern for criminal aliens in jail, Congressman Farr, and I share your concern on that. And as I've shown in my previous testimony, I think we've made a tremendous progress. Not all criminal aliens are currently incarcerated. And, we have a responsibility with respect to enforcing the immigration laws for individuals who are out on the street, targeting transnational criminal organizations so fewer people can come in and commit other crimes and get into jail, and also for enforcing the immigration laws for fugitive absconders.
But what I see in my district, frankly, is more arresting babysitters or deporting them, not even arresting them, just sending them letters saying, report to the INS station, and they voluntarily go home because they don't want their children seeing them being arrested. I've had a lot of people tell me that these things happen. And obviously with the raids that you've had with warrants, looking for people who are, and then people who aren't there, I think half the people you rounded up in the Santa Cruz raids didn't even have warrants out for them. They were just in the wrong place at the wrong time. So what happens is the public image of you becomes one of not this compassionate law enforcement agency, but essentially a Gestapo-type agency that is
Congressman
knocking
Farr,
on
we are
doors.
not the Gestapo, and I will not
Well,
listen to you call our agents, the people who work every day. You did that last year to me.
Yes.
I thought that was inappropriate,
And
I will
And
not
I told you last year where I got that term was
Gestapo.
from one of your agents. Who told me that's the way people think of her.
Congressman Farr, I share your concern. I think we've made a number of strides. I think Congress is in the best place to change the law.
But why not just do the way? That's already in the law. The point is, I don't think with the agency with a $4.7 billion budget, you're doing what the law requires, which is to go into those jails.
Okay, well, Congressman
You ought to
Farr,
have 100% coverage.
Congressman Farr, I appreciate very much your comments, and I look forward to your feedback as we submit the report and as you see kind of the progress that we've made. And I also look forward to your continued support for comprehensive immigration reform, which will allow us as an agency to focus on things you think are appropriate if the law is changed. But I will say that the men and women of this agency have a very difficult job. The men and women of this agency work hard day in, day out under very difficult circumstances, no-win circumstances really. When you think that there are 780,000 state and local law enforcement officers and less than 16,000 or about 16,000 ICE employees. We have very difficult jobs, and I think they do that with distinction and great honor.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes.
I wish to disassociate myself from the characterization of ICE agents as Gestapo-like. That's not called for here, Mr. Farr. And I, for one, want to disassociate myself from that kind of characterization. These are proud, hardworking people.
I appreciate that, and I know that. I'm just telling you that there is a very ill-will public opinion in the counties that I represent about ICE.
Mr. Serrano.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Secretary Myers, public opinion is important, and so I'm going to give you a perception that a lot of people have, and maybe you can help me, and I mean this sincerely, understand why we have it. We have a lot of folks in this country who are here undocumented. I happen to be one of those members of Congress who thinks that that's not the worst thing in the world, that our country could always use immigrants in any way, shape, or form, and we've been through that before. But the perception I get, and the perception most people get, good or bad, is that most of our focus is on the southern border, and therefore on Mexicans. Yet, if you look at the nation, Mexicans make up a part of the undocumented, but not the whole body. If you look at New York City, you find large amounts of people, undocumented, who are not Mexicans. Why do I get the perception that most of the focus of our federal government is on keeping Mexicans out and almost looking the other way on other people coming in?
Congressman Serrano, I certainly regret if there's any perception with respect to focus on any particular ethnicity or background. Certainly at ICE, we are only focused on criminal aliens of all types and on customs violations. But I would say one thing that might lead to this perception would be that the staffing along the southern border for the Border Patrol and other agents is significantly higher than staffing in other parts of the country. So in interior parts of the country, as I mentioned earlier, in my home state of Kansas, you have 5 or 6 agents in the whole state. And so the enforcement action that's going on in Kansas is considerably less than the enforcement action that's going on in certain southern border areas, in areas where there are large numbers of Border Patrol agents and the like.
Well, for instance, whenever I get a chance, I bring up the issue of the territories, either in a positive way or in another way that it has to be brought up. And we know that on a daily basis, there are people who get to our territory, especially the ones closest to us as Virgin Islands and Puerto Rico, and then they just get on a plane and land up in one of the 50 states, and it would appear to people that the enforcement, and again, for the record, I'm not one who is demanding enforcement because I don't have a problem with people coming into my country, right? If I was not born in a territory, I'd probably be trying to find a way to get into this country too, but I didn't have to do it that way. Yet the perception still continues to be, or not even perception, the action that you see, the reporting on TV, what you read in the newspapers, all seems to be focused on getting folks coming across the border into the United States from Mexico. So therefore, I think it's not improper to feel that it's directed at Mexicans. So I guess my question is, do you feel that we are balanced in the resources we put into looking at other folks entering through other parts of the country other than the Mexican border?
Well, certainly, Congressman Serrano, it's very important to ICE, who has a mission not only for transnational crimes, but also interior enforcement, that our interior areas of the country are fully staffed, and that we look to the northern border and to risks for visa overstays, not only for student violators, but for others who come on other types of visas. And that is the core part of our mission, is making sure that we really attack all those transnational threats and that do so in an appropriate manner.
Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Rayburn Allard.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to discuss 2 other issues that I think that also feeds into the perception, the negative perception of ICE. As you know, Victoria Arellano died in ICE custody at the San Pedro Processing Center in July of 2007. And according to accounts by detainees who witnessed the events leading up to her death, ICE did not respond in a timely manner to numerous and increasingly desperate requests for urgent medical attention, which was made by her and her fellow detainees as her condition continued to deteriorate in the weeks prior to her death. And according to Human Rights Watch World Report 2008, which was released in January of this year, and this is a quote, the U.S. fails to ensure that detainees with HIV/AIDS receive medical care that complies with recognized standards for correctional health care. Medical care in facilities operated or supervised by ICE is delayed, interrupted, and inconsistent to the extent that endangers the health and lives of many detainees. That's the end of the quote. What were ICE policies for responding to requests for medical attention from detainees at the time of Victoria Arellano's death, and what changes and safeguards have been put in place so that ICE personnel respond in a timely manner to provide the services that are needed?
Congresswoman, let me first just say it's an absolute tragedy when anybody dies in ICE custody. And we work very hard to make sure that the medical care, and last year we spent about $100 million for medical care of individuals in our custody, is first rate, and that the Division of Immigration Health Services provides the kind of medical care that is needed in a timely manner and does so in appropriate ways. And we have taken a number of steps, although there were already procedures in place that provide for certain cross-checking, provide for if there are requests, they need to be responded to in this amount of time, and certain cross-checking. And the doctors at the Division of Immigration Health Services are the ones responsible kind of for making those determinations. We have done some things over the past year to improve our program overall in terms of detention, including in the medical arena. And one of those things was the Detention Field Inspection Group, which goes out and looks at not only the conditions of our facilities overall, but also on the medical care side. We have our quality assurance specialists who are in 40 of our largest facilities who are able to respond to kind of particularized needs if they feel that their forms aren't being processed quickly enough or that their care is not being attended to. Every individual who comes into ICE custody goes through a full screening within 14 days, and we have diagnosed chronic conditions for, I believe, over 28% of individuals that come into our care. And so
But
we're
were these quality controls in place at the time that Arellano died?
Some of those quality controls were in place, and some of them were just coming onto place. Because I've made one of the things I've spent a lot of time on in this agency is improving the overall quality of care for individuals in our custody. One additional thing that I think will continue to address this, and of course her case is in litigation, so I can't talk specifically about that, is that we are moving all of our ICE detention standards to make them performance-based standards, which will better ensure that the IGSAs and others who are then held accountable for making sure the medical needs are met, that they have kind of a higher bar to meet and that it's clear to them. Currently, those performance-based standards are out for comment with the NGOs right now, and so we're working with them in a collaborative manner to make sure that this updating will be done.
So there are medical experts that are also reviewing these new policies to give you feedback?
Yes, they are. And then, of course, there also are separate policies from the Division of Immigration Health Services that they have on their own, that they kind of monitor on their own. But for the ICE standards, certainly there are.
Okay. Another issue of concern is that, according to CBP, approximately 10% of all undocumented persons that are apprehended along the southern border are unaccompanied children. And in accordance with the Juvenile Justice and Delinquent Prevention Act, the Flores Settlement, and the Homeland Security Act, these minors are to be transferred to the Office of Refugee Settlement within 3 to 5 days, given access to counsel, not held with adults or adjudicated delinquents, nor are they to be prevented from going through a process of expedited removal. However, my office has been getting reports from very reputable immigrant rights organizations that each of these protections has been repeatedly violated. Can you explain why we're still seeing situations where this is occurring and that children aren't being expedited through the process and treated so that they are under safe conditions as required by law?
Congresswoman, at ICE, we've been working with ORR and CBP to try to streamline kind of the movement of any of these unaccompanied minors from CBP to ORR. Sometimes there are situations where ORR does not have housing kind of in the local area. They're not able to accept it. Either the flight's not available, et cetera, et cetera. We're putting together kind of a book of kind of best practices to ensure that our link, which is really this little transportation link, it's not kind of holding them in the CBP cells. That's done obviously by CBP. It's not dealing with them on the ORR side, is as smooth and streamlined as possible. And we are really trying to shorten any amount of time that we have any involvement so that it can be as smooth as possible from CBP to ORR. We've made some good progress on that over the year, and I think in very short order we're going to be able to show some more significant progress there, because it is not in ICE's interest to have custody of these individuals for any longer, for any amount of time.
Okay. Well, I really hope that there's going to be some real focus on these children, and also that just in general that ICE gets training so that that they are more sensitive to these detainees and what their specific needs are. Because in many cases, and we've been talking about, criminal aliens, in many cases, we're not talking about criminal aliens, and in this particular case, we're talking about children. And I think that there needs to be some kind of sensitivity or some kind of professional training so that there is a clear understanding by those who work in your agency.
Well, I believe that part of the reason that Congress had put unaccompanied minors into the care and custody of ORRs is because they wanted ORR to actually handle this very sensitive class of cases. And so at ICE, what we're trying to do is reduce down to virtually nothing the amount of time that we're transporting them. And now we're not holding them initially, and we're just kind of transporting them. And so that's what we're trying to kind of really reduce that time so that these sensitive cases, these unaccompanied minors, can be in the custody of ORR as quickly as possible.
Thank you. I realize that we're under some time pressure here, but I would like to hold a brief concluding round of questions, and I'll try to set a good example myself here in abbreviating my questions. But I do want to touch on a couple of things, and then all of us, of course, will submit additional questions for the record. I want to go back to the first witness we had this morning and the Student Exchange Visitor Program just for a moment, Ms. Myers, and then turn to the Federal Protective Service. You heard Ms. Cotton's testimony, and you understand the position she articulated that the new fees are not going to be welcomed in any case, but if there are to be new fees, that there needs to be a clear benefit articulated, which will justify them. And I just would appreciate your confirmation that the suggestions that Ms. Cotton raised and about the kinds of benefits that would be valued. Streamlined travel for students, improved databases and student access to SEVIS records, liaison officers who are responsive to both educators and students, coordinated federal reviews with other departments, those kinds of benefits that could potentially come. I mean, we're talking here about some improvements in departmental policy and practice, but also some things that would cost money and that could conceivably benefit from the fee increases you're talking about. I wonder if you could commit to taking a very close look at those kinds of recommendations and to including them in the fee rule. I mean, not just a vague promise, a future promise, but to the extent you can possibly make it quite explicit in the rule itself what where the money's going to go and what the benefits are going to be.
Certainly, Chairman, I did think that Ms. Cotton's testimony was very useful and very enlightening in terms of the needs of the academic institutions. And we are trying to work as close as we possibly can to make sure we take into their needs, the stakeholder needs, in terms of upgrading our IT infrastructure, making sure the liaisons will be as helpful to those schools as possible, and really providing as much value as we can. I will commit that we'll work as closely as possible, not only with Duke, but with all the other academic institutions. There are a few things that Ms. Cotton wanted to do that may be a bit out of our control in terms of kind of controlling data streams from the Social Security Administration or other things, but absolutely we're going to make sure whatever we can do in terms of SEVIS 2 upgrade, making it useful on the school side, liaisons making them useful on the school side, and really kind of showing what we'll do.
I think that's important because some of these changes are needed regardless of any connection with fee increases, and also to the extent there must be fee adjustments, the negative signal they send would be mitigated, I believe, by some concrete demonstration of the payoff.
Well, we'll try to make sure it can be as concrete as possible to provide that help. Of course, tuition has the fees have not been raised since 2003, and of course we are mandated to do SEVIS as a fee-funded institution. Tuition at many schools, including many private institutions, has gone up considerably more kind of over that time. We are mindful of any implication that any fee raise might have, and we want to make sure we roll it out in the most responsible manner. Well, and of course,
This doesn't cancel any need for a justification of those increases, but I think the demonstration of benefit is important. The Federal Protective Service is supposed to protect federally occupied buildings, but a recent GAO report highlighted how changes in the agency have left it unable to complete its mission. As I said earlier, the report's authors determined that the capabilities of FPS have deteriorated so substantially that federal facilities that it's charged to protect faced a greater risk of crime or terrorist attack. Now, we dealt with this in the 2008 bill. The appropriations bill for the current year requires you to staff FPS with at least 900 police officers and 1,200 total employees, and mandates that security fees charged to agencies for FPS programs be increased to fund this growth. However, this isn't reflected in your 2009 budget request. It reflects only 950 personnel at the agency for 2009. Now, I understand that you now are planning to increase fees and hire additional personnel at FPS in 2008, in fiscal 2008, as required by law. I want to confirm that that's correct and ask you when the increased fees will be put into effect and when the new officers will be hired, and when we will also then get a budget amendment that shows a more realistic estimate of how this program will be funded in 2009.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And based on the language in the appropriations bill, we are indeed raising the rates both for fiscal year 2008 and fiscal year 2009. I anticipate that the letter informing the customers of the raise in rates for 2008 will be going out in the next week or so. We are currently moving that through final clearance here, and then we will begin the process of hiring. If we do not have an announcement out, I believe we're going to have an announcement out in the next week or so, and we're going to move very aggressively to try to get these individuals on board. To have the 950 law enforcement personnel, many of them are going to be inspectors with police authority, so they will not necessarily be police officers only. But you know, I do think that the committee's review of FPS has been very helpful. The move from GSA and the lack of that funding, which they had really relied on for so many years, has been very, very difficult. And so I think that the committee support here has been very helpful, and I look forward to a stronger FPS.
I think maybe you misspoke, or maybe I did not hear you correctly. You are committing to the 900 police officers.
It's at 900 law enforcement personnel, so they will be inspectors who have police training. They will not be hired as police officers only. So they'll be able to do both duties. I believe into the language it was 900 law enforcement personnel, which these inspectors would qualify as.
Right, and then we'd anticipate 1,200 total employees, as opposed to the 950 that's included in the budget we have now.
That's right. That's right.
All right, thank you, Mr. Rogers.
Let me quickly and briefly talk about 287G.
Yes.
I'm a strong believer in that. The federal personnel that you have, although the second largest in the federal government, is still a drop in the bucket, frankly, compared to the number of illegals in the country, estimated from 12 to 15 million. So the only way we're ever going to be able to have a chance to stop that flow and cut off the magnet that are the jobs that are in this country for people seeking work is to enlist the aid of local police, state and local police. And 287G provides the training to allow them to assist you in that work. What do you think about 287G, and is there enough money in your budget request to engage more local officials in the work?
Ranking Member Rogers, I think 287G has been a terrific force multiplier. We currently have 38 entities which have signed memorandums of agreement with ICE. That's up from only 2 before I started at ICE. And so I think using it strategically, we can really make a difference. Of course, whenever we partner, we have to make sure that we have the detention facilities necessary. If individuals are apprehended, we have to make sure we have kind of the ICE resources kind of on the back end of the removal process to support that. But I do think it's a critical program. One other thing that we've developed is the ICE Access Program, which looks at kind of the broader service services that ICE can offer. Sometimes we were finding that particular communities had narcotics problems or foreign-born gang problems, and they said they wanted 287G when they really wanted somebody to help them with their foreign-born gang problems. So we're looking under ICE Access to do that. I do think that the $12 million proposed for 09 will allow us to strengthen the 287G program there in particular targeted places. We are making sure we roll this out very deliberately, that we're doing audits of the program, that we can make sure that these authorities are being used in a responsible manner.
Well, congratulations on the improvement in 287G. As you say, you've signed 38 agreements, 10 more pending. 78 more localities have requested info seeking agreements. You've trained so far 630 state and local law enforcement officers in that program, ranging in states from California to Arizona to North Carolina. Thank you for the work that you've done so far with 287G, and I wish you Godspeed in that program as well as all the others. I think you're doing a great job down there.
Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Rodriguez.
Thank you very much. And let me go back to, I think, a question that Lucille had asked and that I wanted to follow up on. And I know that I have been, and that you've been also at the Hutto facility for the families. Can you maybe, and that was last year, so can you let me know in terms of what's been happening there, or have we established any different types of strategies, or have the number increased? I know we have several facilities there that are family, where the entire families are there, Madam Secretary.
In terms of the Hutto facility, we are actually now using part of the facility for non-criminal females. The estimates that the Border Patrol initially provided about families that would be coming in that would need to be housed in Hutto, it did not appear that the numbers kind of matched those initial estimates. So
they've dropped?
It is dropped, and of course that's consistent with the overall drop in apprehensions kind of across the southern border. In terms of the Hutto facility specifically, we have developed 37 residential family standards, and these standards will apply not only to Hutto but to Berks, and they were developed working with the ACLU in the context of the lawsuit against Hutto, and working with other NGOs who also had an ability to provide input into what those standards need to be. Long term, I think we're looking at whether or not Hutto is structurally the kind of facility that would make most sense for this particular environment, non-criminal families.
No, we had another facility that was similar in another part of the country. What's the situation there? Has those numbers dropped there too?
No, those numbers in the Berks facility can house about 87 people or so, so it's always been a very small facility, and that facility has remained full.
Let me ask you also, and thank you, in regarding the issue of cybersecurity. I know we've been working on that, from the department perspective, I noticed you asked and I asked the wrong person in terms of the 5.7 million. That's a very, at least I see a very small number there in terms of protecting the computers for money laundering and and that kind of international fraud that occurs. Do you see a need for us to beef up on that, or what's the situation in that there from when it comes from cybersecurity?
Well, certainly the ICE's cybersecurity request is only part of the department's cybersecurity request. ICE focuses on cybercrime, crimes that are committed over the internet, including child predators as well as counterfeit pharmaceuticals. This year, the president's proposed budget for 09 provides funding for the first time since ICE has been created for some of the key core customs authorities that we have. And so certainly I would welcome very much the committee's support to that. We are seeing more and more crimes that, being committed over the internet and computers used to facilitate all kinds of crimes. So it's important that our forensic agents and our cybercrime center remain up to date with the latest changes in technology.
And one of the biggest problems we had with 9/11 is one agency not dialoguing with the other. How are we working with the FBI and others as it deals on, for example, on cybersecurity? Do we have some kind of structure set up?
We work very closely not only with the FBI but with the Secret Service, which also has kind of a related role in cybersecurity. They have their electronic crimes task forces, and we work with other law enforcement agencies as well. In terms of the FBI, one of the best ways I think that we engage with them is through our participation on the JTTFs, or the Joint Terrorist Task Forces, where ICE is the largest participant, other than the FBI, on these JTTFs, where we work really the really sensitive terrorism cases, or the cases where really sensitive immigration cases are often worked through the JTTF.
I just want to emphasize the importance of having the exercises, because there's nothing worse than, and I won't mention the community, that they talk about what a great facility they have, what great things they're doing, and then when something happens, it falls apart. And, you know, we had a similar a situation occur unless some actual exercises take place where you go out there and go through that training, you know. And so I would just want to emphasize the importance of that, okay? Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Culberson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. If I follow up Secretary Myers on the 287G program, and in particular with respect to the Houston Police Department, Houston is the 4th largest city in the United States. And I want to confirm what you said earlier. It's your understanding that ICE does not, the Houston Police Department has prevented, or the city of Houston has prevented ICE from putting an agent in the Houston City Jail.
Well, it's my understanding, and I would like the opportunity to kind of follow up with you in writing on this.
Okay.
We do not currently have an agent in the jail, and whether or not we've been prevented, I think, is something I want to make sure I clarify.
Yeah, what my office checked, and I've checked, and Houston won't let your folks in. So that's a problem they face. Sam, in a lot of these jails, ICE literally is prevented from coming into the Houston jail. I know that's a problem, and I'm happy to try to help you with that. Your memorandums of agreements that you have with 38 state and local agencies, you've got 78 agencies that have requested to participate in the 287G program. That's an immediate force multiplier that would make a dramatic difference in helping you deal with the problem that you face with the large number of criminal aliens out there. Yet y'all have only asked for $2.67 million for the program. And I know that, for example, the Houston Police Department has also refused to even participate in the 287G program, which is really dangerous. The Fort Dix terrorists, I think 2 or 3 of them, of the Fort Dix terrorists, where's my note on that? There were 3 of the Fort Dix terrorists had received up to 19 traffic tickets, but because they got the tickets in sanctuary cities where the city either won't participate in 287G, they won't ask the question, you never knew about it. How can this committee help you expand the ICE program? Y'all are only asking for $2.67 million. There's obviously a tremendous demand among local agencies to try to help you with it, and that's an immediate way to be a force multiplier. And then as a final note, my office has found 4,000. We checked with my friends in the state legislature, where Ciro and I came out of, and Henry, my friends in the state legislature in Texas, and then also in Louisiana, and we checked up and down the border. We found 4,000 vacant beds available in private facilities today that you could contract for, that the Border Patrol the marshals could contract for. So 2 questions. One, what do we need to do to help you expand the 287G program in particular to make sure you've got that full force multiplier available for you?
Congressman, I believe that the request for 09 was $12 million, but
okay, you've asked for $12 million.
I certainly take your point about making sure we have enough money to kind of manage this program appropriately. One of the things that we wanted to do in 09 is make sure that as this grew significantly, and as 287G beds are actually taking up like a little more than a quarter of our entire bed space, that we're really doing it kind of in targeted areas. And so I hired Jim Pendergraft, who's a former sheriff down in Mecklenburg County, to be the head of our Office of State and Local Coordination, to make sure that we're doing this in a coordinated way, and to also make sure it's very important that we protect civil rights and civil liberties, and that we do not engage in any racial profiling, so to make sure that we're doing the kind of training and then the kind of auditing kind of for this program. And so based on that, this request was allowed to be kind of a reasonable request, knowing that our agency had made substantial progress over the past couple of years. With respect to, I'm sorry.
I'm just going to ask, how much will that, how many new officers, new agencies will the $12 million allow you to
Well, each each request actually can cost more than $12 million. So this $12 million is dedicated towards training and some other IT things, because running just one 287G program, it averages about $17.5 million a year. And so that is, it includes primarily beds, the ICE oversight, and the other things. And so we want to make sure that when we're doing it, it's places where primarily jail institutions or places where the task forces kind of would make most sense. So this $12 million is designed to help us with a new training facility that we're working to get up and going. One of the issues we've had is making sure we get training in right places. It requires the state and locals to be off from their training from 4 to 6 weeks, depending on the program.
I don't follow you. How can one 287G program cost you 17 million? I mean, they're different from area to area.
And that's the
certainly-
average. That's the average of what it costs in terms of, and
in
that's
Houston,
really.
I can see that, but in, for example, Marfa, Texas, out in the West Texas sector, you're not going to have the same.
Well, I think we'll obviously continue to look at the averages as the numbers grow, but it's actually been, that's what's been the average. And when you think about a quarter of our bed space is 287G bed space, and then you want to make sure, are these the aliens the highest priority criminal aliens, or are there aliens from jails that might be higher priority criminal aliens that we could use with the beds that Congress has given us? So we're just trying to manage this in an appropriate manner. I appreciate very much the committee's support, and I want to assure you that we'll use every bed that has been allocated to us for Congress. We'll spend every dollar towards that.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. We found 4,000 beds for you that are vacant, and I'd be happy to show them to you. And
That'd be great. But the issue for us, of course, is the money, and not actually having a vacant bed in a particular location. It's having to be able to fund that number of beds kind of throughout the year. If they'll give them to us for a discount, we might have a deal. But thank you.
Mr. Serrano.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Secretary Myers, I want to ask a question that I asked last year, but there are new developments since then. Luis Posada Carriles is a known terrorist in the Western Hemisphere. He boasts, and he has been accused of blowing up a Cuban airplane carrying the whole Cuban Olympic fencing team of teenagers, team made up of teenagers. He was accused, and he has given interviews taking credit for blowing off exploding bombs in 2 Cuban hotels to fend off tourists. He came into this country a couple of years ago undocumented. And notice I use that phrase for even people I don't like, undocumented. And he was held not on terrorist charges, which was an outrage, but on immigration charges. And he eventually was released. Is his release final? I mean, is he a free man walking in Miami as he is now, or does he still have pending business before immigration authorities in this country?
Well, Congressman Serrano, first let me just say, I share your frustration. We were very frustrated by the result of the district court case and the inability to proceed on the kind of criminal charges that we were interested in bringing. And we also fought the release of Mr. Posada and lost that. And so that was ordered release. I will have to follow up with you on the current status of the immigration proceeding there. I just don't have that with me on top of my tongue, but I certainly share your frustration. And that actually, unfortunately, that case is not, it's not the only one of those kinds of cases where we have a situation where there's a very bad person in this country, and then we're not able to prosecute him or her for the crimes they've committed, and then we're not able to then send them home for one reason or another. And that is kind of a growing problem for us, and it's a source of frustration when people see these individuals kind of out in the community. So I certainly share your concern.
So, but this is encouraging, believe it or not. So you're saying that your agency made an attempt before the court, perhaps, to say this person should not be released, should be held?
There was a district court proceeding, which of course we lost on early on, and then, and I believe, and we'll respond to you in writing, but I believe that when the immigration judge ordered this person released, that we had opposed that. Our lawyers in the immigration court had opposed that, but I will have to get that back to you in writing to make sure I'm precisely accurate.
And I'd like you, in that letter, if you can, to tell me if your concern or what you presented was that he was here undocumented, illegally, or the other accusations made against him, the escaping from a Venezuelan jail after he was being held on charges there, and so on. In other words, I'd like to know if you were saying don't release him because he has committed, he's broken the immigration law, or because you were concerned that he in fact was what we all claim he is, a known terrorist.
I'll absolutely.
We'll call him a criminal for your purposes.
I'll absolutely get you all the details. I just remember as a prosecutor myself, whenever you're trying to push for detention, you obviously throw in whatever you can. So I'm sure it was a pretty aggressive case, but we'll get that to you in writing.
So for the record, you folks were not in favor of having this man released.
That's my recollection, but I did not review that in preparation for today's testimony, so I want to make sure I'm absolutely correct. But that is my recollection that we oppose that.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Mr. Farr.
Well, first, thank you for the response to Mr. Serrano's question. I think that's the kind of priorities that we're talking about, and really being upfront about being consistent with prosecuting those criminals or what I wanted to ask you was, in this report, you're to identify prisons, jails, and correctional institutions in which every criminal alien could be held. Do you know how many institutions there are of those?
Our count is slightly different than the Justice Department's count, and because I think some institutions that are connected we might consider as one versus they consider as two. Our count is 4,492.
Let me ask you how you're going to approach this. It says in the report, in the language in the bill, that none of the funds will be made available to improve or modernize efforts to identify and remove aliens committing a crime sentenced to imprisonment and who may be deportable. Does that, see, here's where my issue has been with you, with the department constantly, because what our local law enforcement has, even in sanctuary cities, I represent some, I've never heard them not supporting removing undocumented people who are in jail. I've never heard any kind of protection. But the protection usually comes, and it's not recognized by federal government anyway, is in the raids, whether they're, had a medical marijuana raid in Santa Cruz. That was contrary to state law, but it was nonetheless a federal raid. People got very upset about that. They get upset about the raids, not the inspections. And so I wonder if this language, or who may be deportable, means that people who may be in jails, in local jails, could be removed because they don't have documentation. I mean, they're there. I know you prioritize it to violent crimes and to those kinds of issues, but could we expect that once we identify this 4,492 institutions that could possibly have deportable persons, that we might be able to follow through on that? That's the question.
Well,
Local law enforcement. What they don't want to be is they don't want to be ICE. They want to be local law enforcement. They'll collaborate with you, and as you mentioned in your testimony, as you have with the gang task force in Salinas, which is a whole try to prevent crime, and then where it is, remove those undesirables in the community, and we can use the ICE folks for that, and I really appreciate it. I've never heard anybody complain about that. In fact, they applaud that, and I applaud that kind of activity. What I'm wondering is, in identifying these 4,492 institutions, whether you're going to have the personnel to be able to go in and do those checks.
Well, Congressman Farr, kind of on your first point, I will say that as surprising as it is, sometimes when we do identify criminal aliens in jails, there is community concern about that. And I would point you to some issues that happened in Irving, Texas, where people were concerned that individuals that were arrested for very minor crimes were turned over to ICE, and that there was a lot of community concern. So actually, even when you're talking about the jails, sometimes there is a particular community concern. What we've done with the almost 5,000, 4,500 jails is we looked at where's the gap. And a lot of them we have covered with full screening right now. We have all the federal institutions covered with full screening, all the state institutions, and then a large number of good, county ones that have a lot of turnover. And so we're looking kind of where's the gap, where's the place where we're not, and then trying to figure out how can we use technology, and how can we use, where do we need to have someone full-time because the amount of people that would be there, justifies and makes sense to have someone full-time, and where does it make sense to try to use technology? Because, in some states, they may only have a couple of hundred criminal aliens coming through parts of their jails in a particular year, and it wouldn't make sense to kind of dedicate a full FTE. So if you have another alternative. The other alternative that we're looking at is using this interoperability technology, which would allow the local jails where we don't have a presence to share biometrics and other information with us, and to do this electronically so that we can then prioritize. And I still think we'd be prioritizing based on the most serious criminals first, but that's our goal, and that's where I think the plan is heading. It's still, it's due about a month from now, so it still has some work to do, but I do think it's transformational in the way we're thinking about it. And I do think it's hopefully, I'm very sorry to hear that we don't have a great relationship with your state and local law enforcement in your area, and I hope that this kind of thing can help build a better bridge.
Well, it's because of the raids have removed people, parents, for example, that indicated one situation in the district where 2 parents of young children got removed. And what they're talking about is, 1, they didn't know you were coming in. 2, the fallout, like see the cop cars with the lights going and people entering buildings. They call the local law enforcement and say, "What are you doing? Why are you taking Jose Serrano away?" And
For the record, I was born a citizen, okay?
And some people are. I mean, then you do the checks and find out, because, in America, we don't walk around with a citizenship card in this country. Nobody in this room has probably an ID on them that can tell that they're American citizens, unless they're carrying their passport or birth certificate. So it's that fallout, and I think if indeed you want to be a compassionate agency, and I hope so, because I think we want to respect law enforcement, then that fallout also has to take it. What happens to those children? I mean, there's an impact on their school, that their parents are gone. They're all of a sudden panicked. I get the calls about what happens in the aftermath. And that's where I think the follow-through, whether these is part of interoperability with social services at the local level, who's going to go to the schools. I mean, if we have a disaster and a child is hurt or injured or killed, they do, counseling in the schools. What about that when a kid's parents are removed, and the kids are American citizens, and the parents decide they want to keep them here because the schools are better here than they are where they're going to deport them to. So that's the kind of holistic kind of intervention that I hope that that's intended here. It sounds like it from your remarks of wanting to be a compassionate agency, but the fallout hasn't yet arrived to where people are thinking of you that way.
Well, I think that one thing I would say that one thing I think is difficult for us too is the fallout we've seen from the other side, and the fallout from a lack of immigration enforcement over a long extended period of years. And so there were people who were here illegally and who were ordered removed, but just decided to flout the immigration judge's orders and decided they're never going to come. I don't have to worry about it. And then when ICE did come, the outrage, how dare you come, even though I already have been through the immigration system, I've already been removed. We do take, I believe we take extraordinary steps in terms of sole caregivers to make sure that sole caregivers can be with their children where appropriate, particularly in the context of worksite enforcement. But it's a difficult thing. And just last week in Minnesota, on Tuesday in Minnesota, a school bus was hit by an illegal alien who'd worked in a meatpacking company and then a cabinet company, and she hit the school bus. 4 kids died. And 9-year-old, and I think 2 13-year-olds and another kind of young child. And that individual was someone we might have encountered if we'd done a worksite enforcement action. And of course she told us she was from Puerto Rico, then she told us she was from Mexico, and then we discovered actually she's from Guatemala. And so it is a difficult. These issues are very, very difficult. We are very hopeful for comprehensive immigration reform, if not in this Congress, the next one, and we'll seek to do the job to the best of our ability.
I'll close on this. It's just a statement. I represent the most successful agriculture in the United States, not a drop of subsidies, $3 billion in sales. It's harvested by the largest farm worker force in the United States. 3/4, maybe 80% are undocumented. You remove those people, you shut down agriculture. So, I mean, this is the fear that's going on, is these people, and they're not people that are just migrants. They're there all the time. They're being paid better wages than a Walmart employee, and better benefits than a Walmart employee. They're paying their taxes. They're abiding by the law. Yes, they're undocumented, but they happen to be harvesting the food that people are praying over. So there's a sense of how you do this without trying to destroy a whole economic workforce that's essential to America as well. And, I think that's Congress's responsibility to do comprehensive immigration reform. But at the same time, I think it's your responsibility as the lead enforcement agency to not just, do raids and indiscriminate removing of people. That's why I'm very interested in concentrating on where they're already locked up, is in our prisons and jails, and even those that may be perpetual in those jails, coming in all the time. They may not yet be convicted, but they are certainly in that criminal stream. So I appreciate, and I'll work with you on it, and I look forward to your report.
Thank you, Ms. Myers, for your testimony this morning. We look forward to working with you as we put the 2009 budget together. With that, the subcommittee is adjourned.